The Chiswick Black Cat, Part 1. The arrival it was a crisp November morning in London when I received a letter of peculiar urgency from Lady Winthrop, a long-time acquaintance of mine residing in Chiswick. She was a lady of considerable social standing, with an elegance that seemed untouched by time, though her hand trembled slightly as I held the envelope in my own. The ink was smudged, perhaps by nervous fingers, perhaps by some unseen haste. The letter read, in essence, that she feared for the safety of her household, and that my presence was most earnestly requested to investigate a matter that had already caused her sleepless nights. I read the words carefully, noting their formal yet trembling tone. The appeal was not one to be taken lightly. Mon ami, I thought, there is more to this than simple anxiety. Indeed, I have learned over the years that a request such as Lady Winthrop's is seldom rooted in mere worry. There is always some hidden order to the chaos that she describes, and it falls to my little gray cells to uncover it dark by mid-morning. I was aboard the train to Chiswick, accompanied by my ever-loyal companion, Captain Hastings. Hastings, ever the enthusiastic observer, fidgeted with the window latch, his eyes darting toward every stranger and sign along the track. He has remarkable talent for missing what truly matters, and yet his presence adds a certain warmth to the business of investigation. "Poirot, do you think this will be another theft?" he asked, "or perhaps a simple case of mistaken identity?" I dare say it sounds less dramatic than Lady Winthrop makes it out to be. I fixed him with a calm, deliberate gaze. "Hastings, the drama of the matter is rarely found in its announcement, but in the subtlety of its manifestation. Observe, always observe, and you shall see that the ordinary is often the cloak of the extraordinary." We arrived in Chiswick as the mist clung to the quiet streets like a shroud. The town itself was serene, deceptively peaceful, but I knew that appearances often conceal the most intriguing of secrets. Lady Winthrop's residence, a grand Georgian manor, stood at the edge of the town, its windows reflecting the gray sky and the faint glimmer of autumn leaves. The gates, wrought iron and painted black, seemed almost to challenge visitors with a subtle hint of foreboding. Upon our arrival, we were greeted by Lady Winthrop herself, a lady still possessing the poise of a duchess, though her eyes betrayed a faint anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot, I am so relieved you have come," she said, her voice a mixture of tremor and relief. It is the strangest thing. I hardly know where to begin." I inclined my head politely, offering the reassurance of my presence. "Madame, you need only speak freely. I assure you, no detail is too trivial for my attention. Every shadow of doubt may hide the shape of truth." She led us into the drawing room, a space of rich mahogany and plush tapestries, where the air smelled faintly of perfume and something else, something faintly metallic, though I could not yet place it. Lady Winthrop seated herself, motioning for us to do the same. I noticed the subtle tremor of her hand as she poured tea, and I made a mental note. The presence of fear or anxiety is often the first clue to unraveling a mystery. "It began with a series of burglaries," she explained, finally. "Nothing was taken of great value, yet there is always the same symbol left behind." She paused, and with trembling fingers, she reached under the lace cloth of the table to reveal a small black figurine of a cat, its eyes carved in a way that suggested a mocking intelligence. I studied it carefully. The figurine was delicate, but the craftsmanship was precise, deliberate. "A black cat," I murmured. "Interesting. Such a symbol might signify a warning, a signature, or even a twisted amusement on the part of the perpetrator." Hastings, peering over my shoulder, frowned. "A toy cat? Surely it is some eccentric jest, Poirot. Nothing more serious." I turned to him sharply, for his casual dismissal is sometimes perilous. "Hastings, note this. It is never a jest when the heart of fear beats behind an object. This cat is a messenger. Observe the details, the posture, the eyes, the markings. They are deliberate. Someone wishes to communicate something, and we must understand what." Lady Winthrop continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not just the cat. The servants are uneasy. They speak in hushed tones, glance at each other with suspicion. And last night there was a cry. A young maid, frightened out of her wits, claimed to have seen. I do not know what, but there is a sense of presence, of watching. I leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes fixed on her face. Madame, the first thing to consider is motive, and the second is opportunity. Tell me, who knew of these burglaries? Were the neighbors aware? Has anyone recently returned to Chiswick after long absence? Lady Winthrop hesitated. There have been visitors, distant relatives, and a new gardener, Mr. Linden, who arrived only last month. And yes, I suppose the neighbors would have known something if asked, though they are polite and discreet. Discreet neighbors can be dangerous witnesses, I thought. Their discretion may hide more than it reveals. But the gardener, yes, the new arrival is a figure of potential significance. One does not simply enter such a household and escape notice if one carries intentions, subtle or malevolent. The afternoon passed with a thorough tour of the manor. I observed the layout: windows, doors, secret corners, and staircases, each providing potential access or escape routes. Hastings, with his habitual curiosity, noted the fireplace and the garden, as though plotting a casual stroll, while I was more concerned with the subtle disturbances: a scuff on the carpet, the misaligned vase on the mantelpiece, the faint scent of something unfamiliar in the air by evening. As the mist thickened and Chiswick took on an almost spectral aura, Lady Winthrop escorted us to the main hall for dinner. The household was assembled, a mixture of nervous staff, aloof relatives, and an enigmatic neighbor, Mr. Darby, who maintained a polite yet scrutinizing gaze upon us. I observed each carefully, noting the micro-expressions that betray hidden intentions. Poirot, Hastings whispered under his breath. You are looking at everyone as if they've already committed murder. I smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, one must look at the world with eyes that perceive beyond the ordinary. Suspicion is not a crime. It is a tool. We shall see who merits attention as the night unfolds. Dinner proceeded with forced civility, punctuated by polite conversation and strategic silences. And then it happened. A faint thump from the drawing room, followed by a shriek. The maid, pale and trembling, pointed toward the source. I rose immediately, motions deliberate and composed. While Hastings stumbled in his usual earnest panic, the room was empty. Yet on the table lay another black cat figurine, identical to the first, its tiny eyes gleaming in the candlelight. No one had entered, no one had left. And still, the message was clear. The game had begun, and Poirot was now unmistakably invited to play. I studied the figurine closely. It was not merely a token. It was a symbol of warning, a harbinger of events to come. I turned to Lady Winthrop and Hastings. We are not dealing with ordinary burglars, mon ami. We are dealing with a mind that delights in mystery and fear. The first step is observation. The second, understanding. And the third will be action. The wind outside moaned through the trees, rattling the windows. Somewhere in Chiswick, a shadow moved. Somewhere, a black cat watched. And I knew, deep in the marrow of my detective soul, that this case would demand every ounce of the little gray cells that had served me so well in years past. Thus ended the first day in Chiswick, and the prelude to what promised to be a most intriguing and perilous series of events. Part 2. The first crime scene. Dawn broke over Chiswick with an almost mournful gray, the mist clinging stubbornly to the trees and rooftops. The manor seemed quieter than the day before, yet in that quiet lay a tension so palpable that even the birds seemed hesitant to chirp. I was seated in the drawing room, meticulously examining the black cat figurine from last night, when a knock at the door announced an urgent summons. It was one of Lady Winthrop's staff, a young housemaid whose pale face spoke of recent fright. Monsieur Poirot, you must come quickly. It is Mrs. Delaney. Ah, I murmured, my little gray cells already alert. Tell me, my dear, what has occurred? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. She is dead. In her room. And there is a black cat. Without further hesitation, Hastings and I followed the maid through the long corridors of the manor. The air grew colder with each step, and a faint metallic scent iron, perhaps blood, began to register on my senses. Hastings whispered under his breath, Poirot, do you think this is murder? I fixed him with my usual calm gaze. Hastings, it is never merely think. Observation will tell us the truth. And already, my instincts tell me we are no longer dealing with trivial disturbances. This is a matter of life and death, and one that demands the utmost care. We arrived at the chamber of Mrs. Delaney, an elderly widow who had served the Winthrop household for decades. The door was ajar, and I noticed immediately that the lock had not been tampered with, nor were there signs of forced entry. That detail alone suggested the culprit was known to the household, or at least able to gain access without violence. Inside, the room was arranged with the care of someone who had long preserved habit and routine. And yet, something was palpably wrong. Mrs. Delaney lay on the carpet, her eyes wide with a frozen expression of terror, her hands clutching at her chest as though in disbelief at the suddenness of her fate. Beside her, placed delicately upon the knitstand, was a second black cat figurine, identical to the ones from last evening. But here was the crucial detail. This one bore a small, almost imperceptible crimson stain upon its paw, a mark that suggested more than mere symbolism. It hinted at intention, malice, even warning. Hastings, aghast, whispered, "Good heavens, Poirot. She's been murdered." "And the cat?" "Yes, Hastings," I replied, crouching beside the body to inspect the scene with meticulous care. "The cat is not mere decoration. It is a signature, a calling card, if you will, left by a mind both clever and audacious. Note the placement, within reach of the victim, yet positioned to attract the attention of anyone entering the room. A psychological gesture, indicating the killer wished the figurine to be seen. I examined Mrs. Delaney's body more closely. No wounds were immediately apparent. Her throat was uncut, her head unbruised. The expression of terror suggested either sudden shock or poison. I noted the faint smell of almonds, a subtle signature of cyanide, and tested the residue on the linens. My instincts were confirmed. Poison, administered with discretion, had ended her life swiftly. The window, slightly ajar, allowed the mist to enter, yet there were no footprints outside. Nor were there signs of struggle within. "Observe, Hastings," I said, pointing to the carpet fibers. "No disturbance beyond what is expected." This was a precise operation, a calculated act, executed with forethought. I turned to the staff who had gathered in the corridor. "Who last attended to Mrs. Delaney?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. The maid hesitated. I did, Monsieur Poirot." She asked for tea. "In the evening, after dinner. I left her soon after. She was quite well then. And the others?" I continued. "Did anyone visit her room last night?" A faint murmur ran through the gathered staff. Lady Winthrop's nephew, Charles, was mentioned by one, the gardener by another. Each alibi seemed plausible, yet inconsistencies, as always, lie in the details. I requested the maid to show me where the tea had been prepared. On the tray, I observed a slight discoloration in the cup that had been used by Mrs. Delaney. Using a fine cloth, I extracted a sample. "Poison," I murmured to Hastings, who nodded with an alarmed frown. "But cunningly applied. A servant might not have dared. Someone with knowledge, confidence, and perhaps a motive beyond mere mischief." As I continued my examination, my gaze fell upon the black cat figurine once more. Its eyes, carved with unusual precision, seemed almost to glimmer in the dim candlelight. The symbolism was deliberate. Warning, mockery, perhaps a sense of ritual. Whoever left it wished the message to be understood, and yet left no trace of identity. Lady Winthrop joined us then, her face pale, trembling. "Mon Dieu, Poirot. Who could do this? Who would dare?" I turned to her with a measured calm. "Madame, the act is indeed audacious, but audacity often masks fear. The culprit is clever, yet not infallible. Observe, as I do, for every small detail, the angle of the figurine, the position of the body, the faint scent that lingers, all are part of a story. And it is my task to read that story, to understand the mind behind it." Hastings, shivering slightly, asked, "Poirot, do you think it will happen again?" I looked toward the window, where the mist coiled like a serpent. Hastings, in cases such as these, one must assume the mind behind the crime will strike again, unless confronted. The first act is a warning. The next may be decisive. We must gather information, observe carefully, and above all, think. Thinking is the weapon against such devious cunning. By evening, the household was in an uproar. Questions flew like sparks in a storm. Who could have entered? Who had opportunity? And yet the answer, as always, lay not in the noise, but in the silent spaces. The subtle impressions left by the killer. The choices made in positioning the scene. The deliberate messages conveyed through objects both innocent and ominous. I retired to my room that night, Black Cat figurine in hand, my mind turning over every detail. The little gray cells were at work, assembling a mental tableau of suspects, motives, and opportunities. And as I drifted into thought, the shadows of Chiswick Manor seemed to deepen, as though the house itself were aware of the mind moving among its inhabitants, a mind sharp, deliberate, and frighteningly intelligent. The first murder had occurred. The game had truly begun. And Hercule Poirot, with his ever-watchful mind, was already 3 steps ahead, though the distance between intelligence and malevolence is never to be underestimated. Somewhere in Chiswick, the Black Cat watched, and the human heart trembled in its wake. Part 3. Gathering the suspects the morning after, Mrs. Delaney's untimely demise dawned gray and oppressive. With the mist lingering like a shroud over Chiswick Manor, the household moved in uneasy silence, the echo of the previous night's horror still hanging in every corridor. I had breakfast quietly in my room, studying the Black Cat figurine once more, mentally cataloging every detail of the crime scene. Hastings, unable to restrain his curiosity, hovered over my shoulder like a persistent shadow. "Poirot," he whispered, "do you really think it is someone from the house? Or could it be an outsider?" I set the figurine down, my fingers tapping thoughtfully against the polished mahogany. Hastings observed the facts. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no disturbance of doors or windows. The killer had access, or the victim willingly allowed them near. This suggests knowledge, familiarity, even audacity. An outsider would have left more evidence of struggle. After breakfast, Lady Winthrop requested my presence in the drawing room. The family and staff had been assembled for what she delicately referred to as a discussion, though it was clear that fear had taken precedence over etiquette. It was the perfect opportunity to begin my inquiries. I stood before them, composed and deliberate, allowing my gaze to sweep across each face. There is a subtle language in expression, the micro-movements of the eye and hand, the small tremors of a mouth attempting neutrality, that betray far more than words ever could. I rely upon this language more than any confession or testimony. Madam, I began, the events of last night are grave indeed. It is my task to determine not merely what has occurred, but why and by whom. Therefore, I shall ask each of you to recount your movements, your observations, and any knowledge you may possess. There was a collective intake of breath, a ripple of tension that spread among the assembled company. I started with those whose presence was least expected to conceal anything: the staff. First, the housemaid Lucy. She was a nervous girl of 18, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. I went to bed shortly after serving Mrs. Delaney her evening tea, Monsieur Poirot. I heard nothing unusual, no visitors, no voices. I did see, though, a shadow moving outside the window, but I thought it was only the wind. A shadow indeed, but one which could signify many things. I noted it quietly, filing it away for a later consideration. Second, the cook, Mrs. Pritchard, a stout woman, with hands seasoned by decades of labor. I was in the kitchen, Monsieur Poirot, preparing breakfast. I did not see or hear anyone leave or enter Mrs. Delaney's room after I had sent the tea. Everything seemed as usual, though the girl Lucy appeared frightened. Her testimony, while sincere, bore the weight of routine and predictability, the hallmark of a reliable but limited perspective. Next, I turned to the family, beginning with Charles Winthrop, Lady Winthrop's nephew. Charles was a man of polished appearance, with the air of privilege softened by a restless nervousness. He spoke carefully, choosing his words as though they were currency to be measured. "I retired to my quarters shortly after dinner," he said. "I was not aware of any disturbances. I admit I did not see Mrs. Delaney after she returned to her room. But surely she had enemies outside the house?" Ah, the instinct to deflect suspicion externally. I noted it silently. A mind that fears external blame may be hiding internal knowledge. Then there was Mr. Darby, the neighbor, an enigmatic man of refined features and a calculating gaze. He did not sit comfortably, nor did he attempt to warm himself with idle conversation. "I was in my study," he said, his tone clipped, reading. "I noticed nothing unusual last evening." I studied him with particular attention. He seemed genuine, yet a spark of amusement flickered in his eyes when the black cat figurine was mentioned. A mind capable of detachment in the face of another's death is a mind to be noted carefully. Finally, there was Mr. Linden, the recently employed gardener, a tall man with calloused hands and eyes that surveyed the room with quiet intelligence. He had been with the household for only a month. "I was in the greenhouse, tending the plants," he said. "I heard nothing, saw nothing. I am not acquainted with all the routines of the staff yet." I noted the vagueness of his statement. New employees are often convenient scapegoats or, at times, the perfect culprits due to anonymity. Once everyone had spoken, I requested the household to remain present while I examined the scene of the crime once more. In silence, Hastings and I retraced our steps to Mrs. Delaney's room. The figurine on the knitstand remained untouched, a silent sentinel in the dim morning light. "Observe, Hastings," I said quietly, pointing to the positioning of the figure. "The orientation, the proximity to the body, the stain upon its paw. It is almost theatrical, a demonstration of control and dominance over the victim. The killer wished to be noticed. And yet," I paused, eyes narrowing, "yet left no fingerprints, no trace of forced entry, nothing but this symbolic presence. We are dealing with a mind that delights in precision and perhaps a touch of cruelty." Hastings shivered. "It is unnerving, Poirot. The idea that someone could plan this so meticulously." "Indeed, Hastings," I said, "and therein lies our first lesson. The more meticulous the murderer, the more subtle the evidence. One must observe the absence of traces as carefully as their presence." I asked the household one final question for the morning. Who had the opportunity to handle the figurines? Reactions varied, some feigned ignorance, others betrayed slight hesitation. Such reactions are themselves revealing. In my experience, fear often leads to truth, and hesitation can be more eloquent than words. By midday, I had compiled a preliminary mental chart of the household, noting connections, potential motives, and suspicious behaviors. I also began to contemplate the significance of the black cat symbol. Was it merely a calling card, or did it have deeper personal meaning for the killer? Such questions would require patience and subtle inquiry to resolve. Lady Winthrop, noticing my silent reflections, asked cautiously, "Monsieur Poirot, do you suspect anyone yet?" I turned to her with a measured smile. Madame, suspicion at this stage is not a conclusion but a tool. Observe closely, speak truthfully, and the mind behind these actions will reveal itself. For now, we watch, we listen, and we think. The first murder tells a story, and we must read it carefully before the next act unfolds. As I returned to my room that evening, the fog outside thickened, curling around the manor like a living thing. I could not shake the sense that the house itself was watching, aware of the presence of a calculating mind among its inhabitants. Somewhere, the black cat waited silently, and I knew that the threads of the mystery were only beginning to intertwine. Part 4. Clues and Red Herrings. Morning air in Chiswick Manor carried a damp chill that seemed to seep through the very walls of the house. The events of the previous evening weighed heavily upon the household. The servants moved with tentative steps, exchanging wary glances in the hallways. The family, too, bore the shadows of unease upon their faces, their forced politeness failing to mask the tension that hung like fog over every conversation. I sat at my small desk in the study, examining the black cat figurine from Mrs. Delaney's room. The crimson stain upon its paw caught the weak light from the overcast sky. It was small, almost insignificant to the untrained eye, yet to me it suggested precision, a deliberate, meticulous signature. The symbolism alone was telling, but the choice of poison, the calculated placement of the figurine, and the absence of signs of forced entry indicated a mind both intelligent and methodical. A mind that relished control, subtlety, and psychological dominance. Hastings, ever restless, peered over my shoulder. "Poirot, you spend hours staring at a little cat. Do you really think it can tell you anything?" "Mon ami," I said, tapping the figurine lightly. "It tells a story, if one knows how to listen. Observe carefully. The angle of placement, the orientation of its gaze, the position in relation to the victim. It is no mere ornament. It is a message, a performance. And the performer wishes to be understood." We began our day by retracing the movements of the household staff and family members. Lady Winthrop had arranged for each servant to present their duties in detail, and I asked them to recount every interaction with Mrs. Delaney in the hours leading to her death. I was particularly interested in small inconsistencies, no matter how minor, for they often reveal the hidden truths of human behavior. It was Lucy, the maid, who first drew my attention. She was timid and hesitant, wringing her hands, her eyes darting toward the windows. I thought I heard something last night, near the back corridor. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was probably just the wind or the old door settling." "Ah, but the wind does not move objects," I murmured. "And doors do not place black cats upon knit stands. Remember, my dear, that the extraordinary is often concealed in the ordinary." Lucy's lips parted in a startled expression. Her hesitation told me more than her words. She had noticed something that she could not fully explain, something perhaps insignificant to her, but vital to my investigation. I filed this away mentally as a potential clue, to be verified later. Next, I examined the black cat figurines themselves. Each was small, delicate, and carved with careful craftsmanship. Yet I noticed slight differences. The first had a smooth paw, the second, a tiny crimson stain, as mentioned. Could the differences be meaningful? I suspected so. A mind meticulous enough to leave figurines would also take care to vary them subtly, encoding information, marking a sequence, or perhaps even taunting the observer. Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, asked, "Poirot, do you really think the killer is trying to communicate with us through little cats?" I smiled faintly. "Hastings, communication is not always direct. Sometimes it is symbolic, suggestive, psychological. A mind such as this does not merely act. It performs. The performance contains information if one knows how to read it." We then began examining the notes. They were the first truly deliberate messages left by the perpetrator. Cryptic and carefully written, each note contained riddles, odd phrasing, and a small black cat emblem at the bottom. One note, found in the garden near a recently pruned rose bush, read, "Observe what you think is ordinary, for the ordinary often hides the extraordinary. Look closely, for the eyes that see little may see much." The handwriting was elegant, almost theatrical, with flourishes that suggested vanity and self-awareness. A mind that leaves notes such as these is one that seeks to challenge the intellect of those who pursue it. I noted immediately that the killer was not only cunning but self-conscious, deriving satisfaction from the complexity of the hunt itself. I asked the household to recount any unusual activity over the previous week. Several small incidents emerged. The gardener, Mr. Linden, had been seen wandering near the back corridors late at night, ostensibly checking the heating system. His explanation seemed plausible, but warranted further investigation. Charles Winthrop, Lady Winthrop's nephew, had received letters which he tore and burned hardly. The letters' contents were unknown, and his defensive behavior suggested he feared discovery. Mr. Darby, the neighbor, had been unusually interested in the household's recent visitors, asking pointed questions about arrivals and departures. Each of these facts, while minor in isolation, began forming a tapestry of potential motives and opportunities. The killer's identity was elusive, but the threads were beginning to reveal patterns. I spent the afternoon inspecting the manor itself. Old doors, hidden panels, and unused corridors offered multiple access points. A small, forgotten stairway led from the servants' quarters to the second floor, almost invisible to casual observation. A clever perpetrator could use these passages to move unseen, placing figurines or notes with impunity. Hastings, observing my meticulous inspection, asked, "Do you really think the killer would plan this much? Just to leave a cat and a note?" "Ah, mon ami," I replied. "Consider the psychology of the act. The killer does not merely wish to kill or frighten. He wishes to assert control, to demonstrate intellect. The meticulous planning, the symbolism, the theatrics, all are as much about power and presence as the act itself. A mind that derives pleasure from subtlety is a dangerous mind indeed." As evening approached, Lady Winthrop called me to her study. "Monsieur Poirot, I find myself fearing even my own family. How can one know whom to trust?" I responded with calm reasoning. "Madame, fear is a veil. It clouds judgment and leads to false accusations. One must observe, note inconsistencies, and separate fact from emotion. The killer thrives on fear. It is our duty to pierce that veil and reveal the truth. Observe everyone, but trust only evidence." It was then that I noticed something particularly intriguing, a small smudge of ink on the windowsill in Mrs. Delaney's room. I had overlooked it during my initial examination. The smudge was unusual, perhaps a consequence of handling one of the notes or letters, but it hinted at hurriedness or distraction, suggesting the killer had been interrupted or anxious. Such details, seemingly trivial, often provide the key to understanding motive and method. Asterisk. Finally, I took note of a series of red herrings carefully laid by the murderer. The gardener's night wanderings, plausibly explained but timed to draw suspicion. Charles's torn letters, suggestive of secretive motives, yet unrelated to the crime. Minor disturbances in the hallways, scuff marks that led nowhere, footprints that didn't match any resident. These misdirections served to confuse and delay, to distract attention from the true perpetrator. The killer was clever, indeed, but even clever minds make subtle mistakes. And it is in these mistakes that justice is found by the end of the day. I had compiled a mental dossier of potential clues, red herrings, and suspect behaviors. Each detail, from the placement of figurines to cryptic notes, from minor disturbances to subtle psychological cues, formed the threads of a complex tapestry. The challenge was to distinguish the genuine threads from the false ones, to discern the mind behind the black cat symbol. That night, I retired to my room with the figurines and notes before me. Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, peered over my shoulder. "Poirot, it seems impossible. How can anyone think of all this?" I smiled faintly, arranging the notes carefully. "Hastings, it is not impossible. It is deliberate. Observe, the killer seeks attention, yet leaves no evidence. The act is as much performance as it is crime, and a performer always leaves traces, if one knows how to look. Tomorrow we shall begin to unravel these traces, one by one, for the first clue is never obvious. It is hidden, subtle, and often concealed within that which seems trivial." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like an inquisitive audience. Somewhere in Chiswick, the Black Cat waited. Somewhere, a mind full of cunning and precision planned the next act of the unfolding drama. And somewhere, Hercule Poirot's little gray cell stirred, poised to catch every nuance, every gesture, every secret, before the next move could be made. Part 5. The second murder. The morning light that filtered through the tall windows of Chiswick Manor was pale, timid, and seemingly reluctant to illuminate the house fully. The previous day's investigation had left a palpable tension in the air, as if the manor itself had become a sentient observer, waiting for the next act in the macabre drama to unfold. The staff moved silently, their whispers muted by fear, and the family members carried themselves with a careful restraint, each aware that trust was now a fragile and dangerous commodity. I had spent the early hours reviewing the notes, the black cat figurines, and the subtle inconsistencies in the testimonies of the household. Hastings, though eager to assist, had been largely relegated to fetching samples, taking measurements, and providing moral support. He shook his head as he handed me a tray of tea. "Poirot, I cannot imagine why anyone would go to such lengths." A figurine cryptic notes. "It seems almost theatrical, but deadly," he said, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Ah, Hastings," I replied, lifting my teacup with measured calm. "The theatrical is a mask, beneath which lies precision, control, and intellect. Observe, the first murder was not random. It was a demonstration of skill and a test, designed to probe our attentiveness. But today, I suspect, we may witness escalation." As the day progressed, the household attempted to maintain a veneer of normalcy. Lady Winthrop presided over morning correspondence, her hands trembling slightly, while Charles Winthrop busied himself with accounts, and Mr. Darby alternated between polite conversation and keen observation. The gardener, Mr. Linden, attended to the grounds with an efficiency that betrayed both diligence and anxiety. It was near mid-afternoon when the shrill cry echoed through the manor, cutting through the otherwise still atmosphere. The sound came from the east wing, the guest quarters. I rose immediately, signaling Hastings to follow. The household converged, a mixture of terror and curiosity. As we hastened down the corridors, the scene that awaited us was even more shocking than the first. Miss Eleanor Prescott, a distant cousin visiting Chiswick Manor, lay sprawled upon the polished parquet floor, her eyes wide with frozen horror. Unlike Mrs. Delaney, her demise was far more dramatic. There was no whisper of poison or subtlety. The room bore evidence of struggle, though minimal. Her hair was disheveled, her hands clutching a small torn piece of fabric, a fragment of her own dress, or perhaps someone else's, deliberately left as a clue. And, of course, beside her lay another black cat figurine, identical in shape to the others, yet here, a faint smear of blood marked its paw, suggesting either her own injury or a symbolic connection. I picked it up delicately, examining the subtle differences. Each figurine had a distinguishing characteristic. The first paw unmarked, the second crimson, and now the third, streaked faintly with the victim's blood. Hastings leaned in, whispering, "Poirot." It's as if the killer is escalating, marking a sequence, almost like a ritual. "Indeed, Hastings," I said, my gaze sweeping the room for additional clues. "The sequence suggests planning and forethought. This is not a crime of passion. It is a performance of intellect, designed to assert dominance over the observer, and perhaps even over the victims themselves." I examined the room meticulously. The window was slightly open, curtains stirred by a faint breeze. No footprints were visible on the carpet leading to or from the window. There were no signs of forced entry. The victim's handbag lay on the floor, contents scattered deliberately yet carefully. A small jewelry box, apparently opened and left untouched, rested near the bed. Clearly, theft was not the motive. Rather, the killer was sending a psychological message. Lady Winthrop, her face pale and drawn, approached me with trepidation. "Monsieur Poirot, 2 in as many nights. Who could do such a thing? And why?" I regarded her calmly, hands folded. "Madame, the killer's objective is not merely to take life, but to assert control, to communicate superiority, to play a game of intellect. Observe the meticulous placement of the figurines, the differing stains, the sequence. It all points to careful calculation. This is no ordinary mind, nor an impulsive act. The murderer is confident, knowledgeable, and enjoys the psychological torment of the household." I turned my attention to the torn fragment of fabric in Miss Prescott's hand. A small clue, perhaps overlooked by a casual observer, yet potentially critical. Upon inspection, it bore the faint scent of perfume, not Miss Prescott's own, but floral, sweet, lingering, suggesting proximity to another person. The placement suggested deliberate inclusion, meant to attract attention and perhaps to mislead. Observe, Hastings, I murmured. The killer leaves us riddles, much like a composer leading subtle motifs in a symphony. Each note, each figurine, each smear of color or scent is a deliberate instrument in the performance. We must read it carefully, for in each detail lies truth. I requested that the household remain present while I conducted a thorough examination. The staff and family gathered hesitantly in the drawing room, eyes wide with anxiety. I questioned them in turn, noting reactions, micro-expressions, and subtle gestures that betrayed thought, emotion, and potentially guilt. Charles Winthrop was uneasy. His fingers drummed on the table, lips pressed thin, eyes flicking toward the east wing. He claimed to have been in the library during the incident, yet the exact timing of his movements remained unclear. Mr. Darby, the neighbor, was calm, almost unnaturally so. He answered my questions politely, but with careful avoidance of details regarding his own activities. His detachment suggested intelligence, perhaps cunning, and warranted further scrutiny. Mr. Linden, the gardener, displayed visible tension, hands trembling as he recounted his morning rounds. Though his statements were consistent with his duties, I noted the anxiety and subtle inconsistencies in the timing. A new employee has less attachment to the household and is often the perfect instrument for manipulation, or perhaps the perfect scapegoat. In the midst of questioning, I noted a faint disturbance on the polished floorboards near the window, subtle scratches, almost imperceptible, leading toward the garden. A potential entry or exit point, though the lack of footprints suggested the killer took extraordinary care. I then turned to the figurine once more. Its eyes seemed to glimmer in the weak light, a silent mockery of the living. Each of these symbols, subtle variations, and deliberate placements spoke of a mind that was both theatrical and cruel. It was as though the Black Cat itself were the perpetrator's alter ego, watching, judging, and asserting dominance over human frailty. Lady Winthrop asked anxiously, "Poirot, what do you believe? Who could be responsible?" I responded carefully, choosing my words. "Madame, it is too soon for certainty, but observe the mind at work. The killer thrives on fear, enjoys subtle misdirection, and is familiar with the household. The pattern indicates careful planning. We must watch for what is absent as well as present, for in absence often lies the truth. And I assure you, the killer will strike again if we fail to anticipate the method and motive." By nightfall, I had mapped the possible scenarios, entry and exit points, sequence of figurine placements, psychological signatures, and behavioral cues. Hastings, weary and exasperated, asked, "Poirot, do you think we can stop him before it happens again?" I looked at him with calm resolve. "Hastings, the stopping is not in brute force, nor in mere vigilance. It is in understanding, in anticipation, in reading the mind that has committed these acts. Observe, think, and reason. That is how we shall catch the Black Cat, and that is how the next act may be prevented." Outside, the fog rolled thick over Chiswick, curling around the trees and walls like a living specter. Somewhere, the Black Cat waited silently, poised to strike again. And somewhere, Hercule Poirot's little gray cells were already calculating, observing, and piecing together the intricate puzzle. The second murder was a warning, a challenge, and a declaration. And the true nature of the Black Cat's mind was only beginning to reveal itself. Part 6. The secret room. The morning after the shocking demise of Miss Eleanor Prescott arrived with a heavy, almost oppressive silence. The manor, usually filled with the faint sounds of domestic life, seemed to mourn. Even the staff moved with muted steps, avoiding eye contact, whispering in hushed tones. Lady Winthrop's face was drawn, her hands trembling as she navigated the corridors. It was clear that the psychological weight of 2 murders had begun to affect not only the household's calm, but also its very fabric of trust. I had spent the early hours reviewing the 2 crime scenes, the Black Cat figurines and the cryptic notes. Each element of the killer's pattern suggested intelligence, meticulous planning, and a desire to control. Hastings, as ever, hovered anxiously by my side, occasionally offering well-meaning but somewhat simplistic observations. "Poirot," he said, "I cannot fathom why someone would do all this. It is not just murder, it is performance, and a very cruel one at that." "Exactement, Hastings," I replied, lifting the figurine carefully. "Observe, the killer does not merely take life. He orchestrates, manipulates, and enjoys the psychological torment. And yet, every performance leaves traces. Traces we must read, for in the minutest detail lies the truth." By late morning, I decided it was imperative to examine the manor more thoroughly. The first two murders had occurred in rooms of apparent ordinary function, the maid's quarters and the guest suite. The repeated use of the black cat figurine, carefully placed, suggested a familiarity with the manor's layout. A killer so intimate with the house would know its hidden corridors, its secret recesses, and perhaps even rooms unknown to the casual visitor. I requested that Hastings accompany me to explore areas of the house often overlooked. We began with the library, a cavernous space lined with bookshelves reaching the ceiling. There was a faint smell of old paper and leather, and the flickering light cast shadows that danced across the spines. My attention was drawn to one particular section, a panel of bookshelves that seemed slightly mislegned. Hastings, running his hand along the woodwork, murmured, "Poirot, do you think there could be something hidden behind here?" "Observe, Hastings," I said, my fingers lightly tracing the edge of the shelf. "The misalignment is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate. This is not decay. This is intention." After a careful push and slight rotation, a soft click echoed from within the wall. The shelf swung inward to reveal a narrow passage, hidden behind layers of wood and dust. A secret room, almost entirely concealed from casual view, lay beyond. The passage was narrow, lined with shelves of forgotten books and decaying papers. Dust coated every surface, yet it was clear that the room had been visited occasionally. I noticed small footprints in the layer of dust, deliberately smoothed over in places, an attempt to obscure movement. The room exuded an air of secrecy, a repository of information deliberately hidden from the household. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, it feels eerie in here." "Yes, Hastings," I replied calmly, stepping forward. "It is here that we often discover the hidden motives of the present by examining the secrets of the past." I began examining the contents carefully. Old letters, diaries, and documents lay scattered in apparent disarray, though the handwriting suggested careful thought. Many letters were addressed to Lady Winthrop's ancestors, detailing disputes, debts, and family grievances. One diary, bound in worn leather, chronicled decades of family life. Alliances, betrayals, and minor scandals dot as I read. I discovered a pattern, a long-standing feud between two branches of the Winthrop family, originating nearly a century prior. The feud involved inheritance, social reputation, and, intriguingly, a legend of the Black Cat, a symbol used within the family to mark treachery or betrayal. Each generation seemed to pass down not only grievances, but also a fascination with the symbolic cat, which had now, in the present, manifested as a tangible instrument of fear. I studied a particular letter, dated nearly 50 years ago. Should any branch seek to deceive or betray, let the Black Cat serve as witness. Let the eyes of the night see the truth, and let no one escape its vigilance. Hastings, peering over my shoulder, asked nervously, "Poirot, do you think the current murderer knows about all this?" "Mais oui, Hastings," I said. The sequence of figurines, the placement, and the notes suggest intimate knowledge, not merely of the house, but of the family history. The murderer draws upon the legends of the past to orchestrate the present. Observe, fear is compounded when one manipulates memory, history, and superstition. Further examination revealed a small chest of valuables, long hidden. Jewelry, coins, and documents of ownership were preserved in meticulous order. One particular piece, a black onyx cat, matched the figurines in miniature and bore faint initials scratched upon its base. Could this be the original inspiration for the killer's symbolic calling cards? Quite possibly. I carefully pocketed the document and figurine, noting all details in my mental ledger. The presence of such objects indicated premeditation, obsession, and psychological fixation. The killer was not merely committing murder for gain. There was a deeper symbolic motive tied to family history, revenge, and perhaps a distorted sense of justice. Hastings, unsettled, asked, "Poirot, could this be the work of someone seeking revenge for old grudges?" "Exactement, Hastings," I replied. "We must consider all angles. The first murder, the second, the placement of figurines, the notes, all are intertwined with past grievances and present opportunity. The killer operates at the intersection of historical knowledge and present action, and we must, step by step, untangle this web." Before leaving the secret room, I noticed a small scrap of paper, carefully folded and partially hidden beneath the chest. It contained a crude map of the manor, indicating the locations of certain rooms and corridors. The map was incomplete but suggested the killer's awareness of hidden passages and access points. Whoever had drawn this map was meticulous, familiar, and deliberate. Returning to the drawing room, I convened a quiet meeting with Lady Winthrop. "Madame," I said, "the murders are not random. They are intricately linked to the history of your family and the manor. The Black Cat is more than a symbol. It is a device of intimidation, a marker of vengeance. Someone in this household, perhaps with knowledge passed down or discovered recently, seeks to execute this design." Her hands trembled as she clutched my arm. "Monsieur Poirot, how can we stop them? How can we even know whom to trust?" "Observe, madame," I said, with measured calm. "For trust is revealed in action, in reaction, and in detail. The secrets of the past illuminate the present. Patience, observation, and meticulous reasoning will reveal the killer, though they may strike again if not confronted. We have now discovered the hidden room, the historical letters, and the patterns. The game has become more complex, but the threads are visible. And I assure you, we shall follow them to their conclusion." That night, I returned to my room with Hastings, reflecting on the discoveries. The secret room had provided crucial insight. The murders were part of a broader scheme, influenced by family history, grudges, and obsession with the Black Cat legend. Each figurine, note, and clue was a deliberate communication, both to instill fear and to assert dominance. Hastings, exhausted and still uneasy, asked softly, "Poirot, do you think the killer will strike again soon?" I regarded him thoughtfully. "Hastings, the killer thrives on timing and effect. Each act is a statement. We must remain vigilant, observant, and above all, think. For in the subtlety of action lies the revelation of truth, and the next move is already in motion." Outside, the fog rolled around Chiswick Manor, curling through the trees, along the walls, and into the hidden corridors. Somewhere within the house, or perhaps just beyond it, the Black Cat watched, silent and patient. And somewhere, Hercule Poirot's little gray cells were already analyzing the past, the present, and the possibilities yet to come. The secret room had revealed much, and it had also deepened the mystery. The Black Cat's true intentions, its orchestrator, and the next move remained hidden, but no longer beyond the reach of careful observation, reasoning, and the inexorable pursuit of truth. Part 7. False leads. The following morning dawned heavy with fog, the pallor of the sky reflecting the mood within Chiswick Manor. The household moved like shadows, cautious and uneasy, their faces etched with suspicion and fear. The murders had shifted the atmosphere from one of genteel calm to a tense fear of mistrust, where every glance could harbor accusation and every word might conceal deceit. Hastings and I convened in the library, the room now serving as our investigative headquarters. I laid out the Black Cat figurines, cryptic notes, and the letters from the secret room in a careful array, noting their distinctive characteristics. Each object represented a thread in the web we were beginning to unravel. "Hastings," I said, "observe well. The killer is clever, yet not infallible. Each act leaves a signature deliberate, subtle, yet discernible. But the mind behind these deeds also lays false trails, designed to mislead the observer. It is our task to distinguish between truth and deception." Hastings peered over my shoulder. "Poirot, I sometimes think there are so many red herrings, one can hardly trust anything at all." "Ah, mon ami," I said, smiling faintly, "but that is precisely the point. The misdirection is part of the performance. Observe carefully, note reactions, scrutinize behavior. Therein lies the path to discovery." We began by re-examining the testimonies of the household. Each statement, while seemingly straightforward, bore subtle inconsistencies. I categorized them carefully: opportunity, motive, and psychological markers. Several leads appeared promising, yet upon closer inspection, revealed themselves to be distractions, red herrings expertly planted to divert attention. Charles Winthrop remained a primary figure of interest. His evasive behavior, torn letters, and nervous glances suggested he was concealing something. Yet the content of the letters, when examined, seemed more concerned with family finance disputes than with the murders themselves. Could his agitation be a personal matter rather than guilt? Possibly, but one cannot ignore human tendencies to mislead through concealment. Mr. Linden, the gardener, was another source of subtle misdirection. His late-night movements and familiarity with the manor made him an easy candidate for suspicion. Yet the evidence of his presence was consistent with routine duties. Still, the killer may have relied on him as a convenient scapegoat, anticipating that observers would fixate upon his unexplained movements. I turned my attention to Mr. Darby, whose calm detachment bordered on arrogance. A man capable of suppressing emotion can both observe and manipulate, but his intelligence also suggested he would avoid leaving traceable evidence. His presence could be genuine or another red herring, designed to draw suspicion through contrast. In order to discern truth from falsehood, I devised a plan. It would require subtle manipulation, a trap designed not to catch the killer unawares, but to provoke action that would reveal intent. Hastings' eyes wide with anticipation asked, "Poirot, a trap? How shall we do that?" "Patience, Hastings," I replied, tapping the figurines. "The killer thrives on psychological dominance. We must exploit this desire. By presenting apparent opportunities, by leaving certain objects in deliberate places, we may provoke behavior that exposes the hand behind the mask." Our first step was to reposition the Black Cat figurines subtly, while ensuring the household was aware of their placement. The figurines would act as both bait and symbol, an invitation to the killer to continue the game, revealing patterns of behavior. Each figurine was carefully moved to a location that allowed observation without alerting the perpetrator. Next, I prepared decoy notes designed to test reactions. I left one in the library, a cryptic message suggesting a new discovery of the family's hidden wealth. The message was deliberately ambiguous, implying that the killer's plans were threatened. I anticipated that the perpetrator might attempt to retrieve, alter, or react to the note, providing the critical clue of behavioral intent. Hastings, pacing nervously, asked, "Poirot, do you truly believe the killer will take the bait?" "Ah, Hastings," I replied with calm confidence. "The mind that orchestrates such meticulous murders is motivated by challenge. Pride, intellect, and the desire for control are irresistible. The trap is not for their capture, but for their revelation. Watch closely. Observe every hesitation, every movement, every glance." We then observed the household. Each resident was under subtle scrutiny, their behavior carefully recorded. Reactions were telling: nervous glances, sudden stiffening, and small gestures that betrayed internal calculation. I noted Lady Winthrop's anxiety, Charles's repeated checking of doors, Linden's tension when asked about the west corridor, and Darby's measured detachment, which itself was a signal of mental calculation. In the late afternoon, as the fog thickened outside, an incident occurred. A soft rustling was heard near the hallway connecting the east and west wings. Hastings, on edge, whispered, "Poirot, someone is there." I moved silently, observing before acting. The rustling ceased as a figure darted back into the shadows, a shadow that seemed to pause, deliberately near one of the relocated figurines. My eyes narrowed. This was no accident. Someone had interacted with the bait. I noted the movement meticulously, though the figure remained unseen. Afterwards, I gathered the household in the drawing room, maintaining composure while observing reactions. My questions were subtle, indirect, designed to provoke psychological response. "Mon ami," I said to Hastings quietly, "observe the subtle tells. A guilty mind will reveal itself in hesitation, in avoidance of eye contact, in micro-adjustments of posture. Innocence is relaxed. Guilt is never comfortable." Several small discoveries emerged. A misplaced key found near the east wing corridor suggested recent access likely by the figure we had observed. A slight footprint in dust, partially erased, indicated the careful, deliberate steps of a familiar hand. A minor disturbance in a curtain, as if someone had glanced into the room while avoiding detection. Each clue was minute, yet collectively they began to form a picture, a clever mind operating under the constraints of knowledge, opportunity, and psychological desire. The killer was neither careless nor impulsive, yet their need to control and communicate was their Achilles heel. By evening, I had completed a preliminary analysis of the false leads and their function. Each red herring, the torn letters, the gardener's movements, Charles's apparent agitation was a device intended to distract, confuse, and delay discovery. The trap had been partially set, and the killer had already interacted with it, providing valuable insight into their methods and timing. I convened Hastings once more in the study. "Hastings," I said, "the mind behind the Black Cat operates like a composer of a symphony, each action deliberate, each note calculated. But even the most meticulous composer leaves subtle traces in rhythm, in pause, in crescendo. We have observed one such trace today. The game continues, and the next move will be revealing. We must prepare carefully, for the stakes grow ever higher." Outside, the fog pressed against the manor like an ominous tide. The windows rattled faintly in the wind, and somewhere within the silent corridors, the Black Cat watched and waited. The household remained under tension, unaware that subtle observation, psychological insight, and calculated manipulation were already closing in upon the mind behind the murders. The trap had been laid, the false leads examined, and the psychological threads teased apart. Yet the game was far from over. Somewhere in Chiswick, the next act of the Black Cat's performance was already in motion, and Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells alert and active, was prepared to meet it methodically, patiently, and with unwavering attention to the smallest detail. Part 8. The third murder. And the break through the fog had become a permanent presence over Chiswick Manor, clinging to the gardens and corridors as if the air itself were conspiring with the unseen murderer. The previous night's observations had left the household on edge, each member aware that someone among them was not only capable of murder, but of manipulation, strategy, and the calculated use of fear. I began the morning in quiet reflection, examining the Black Cat figurines, the cryptic notes, and the secret room's letters. Hastings hovered, a bundle of nerves and curiosity. "Poirot," he said, "I cannot imagine how someone could keep this up. 3 murders, clues, notes. It's as if the house itself conspires against us." "Mais oui, Hastings," I said calmly. "But remember, the house is merely the stage. The mind behind the Black Cat directs the performance. And the more meticulous the mind, the more subtle the traces it leaves. Our task is to interpret them." I had spent the early hours mapping the household and revisiting each suspect. Every behavior, hesitation, glance, or overemphasis was recorded meticulously. The psychological signature of the killer was becoming evident: obsession with symbolism, enjoyment of fear, intimate knowledge of the manor, and a compulsive need to assert intellectual dominance. The day passed quietly until mid-afternoon, when a scream rang out from the north wing, the oldest part of the manor, where family heirlooms and antiques were stored. Hastings and I rushed through the corridors, the echoes of our hurried footsteps mingling with the distant foghorns of the Thames in the north wing. We discovered Mr. Darby, sprawled across the floor, his eyes wide in shock. Unlike the previous victims, the method of murder was brutal. A blunt instrument, a rare antique candlestick, had been used. Yet beside him lay the familiar Black Cat figurine, its paw smeared with blood, staring directly at the room's entrance as though mocking the living. Hastings whispered, pale-faced, "Poirot, 3 in as many days. And look at the cat. Always the same." I knelt beside the body, inspecting carefully. The scene was chaotic, yet deliberate. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbance beyond what was necessary to execute the act. The choice of murder method differed from the previous killings, suggesting the killer was escalating, testing new means, and adapting to circumstances. Yet the Black Cat remained the symbolic constant. I observed a faint smudge of dust on the windowsill, footprints in the soft soil just outside the north wing, and a subtle mark on the floorboards, a pattern of precision and repetition, yet with enough variation to suggest adaptability. The killer's intelligence was evident, careful, calculated. and evolving. Returning to the drawing room with the figurine in hand, I addressed the household. Ms. Amos, observe carefully. The method may change, yet the signature remains. The black cat is not merely an object, it is a message. The choice of victims, the sequence, the placement of objects all communicate intent. And each act provides insight into the mind behind it. I then laid out my breakthrough, the pattern of the murders. The first victim, Mrs. Delaney, was elderly and inconspicuous, chosen for vulnerability. The second, Miss Prescott, was younger, a visiting relative, slightly more prominent, chosen to provoke greater attention and fear. The third, Mr. Darby, was intelligent, observant, and detached, a figure whose death demonstrated audacity, both to the household and to the investigator. The sequence, Hastings, I said, is deliberate. Each murder escalates psychologically and socially. The killer's objective is not merely to kill, but to assert dominance, control, and fear. Observe also the pattern of figurines and bloodstains. They serve as a visual code, marking each act, each statement, each victory. Hastings, trying to grasp the implication, asked, "Poirot, does this mean we can anticipate the next target?" "Yes, Hastings," I replied. The pattern reveals intent. The next victim is likely someone whose presence or knowledge threatens the killer, yet whose elimination would further demonstrate control. We must identify not only who is at risk, but also how the killer operates. That is where observation, patience, and deduction converge. I requested a private interview with Lady Winthrop. Her fear was evident, yet she provided crucial insight. Family dynamics, past grievances, and the hidden secrets in the secret room letters painted a portrait of potential motives. Rivalries, inheritance disputes, and symbolic significance of the black cat were all threads in the killer's psychological tapestry. Next, I examined the black cat figurines again, noting subtle differences. The first had a clean paw, the second bore crimson, the third bore the victim's blood. A sequence emerged. The figurines were not mere symbols, but markers of escalation, deliberate messages to the household and to me. Each murder was part of a narrative, a calculated story being written in real time. Hastings, troubled, asked quietly, "Poirot, do you think the killer knows we are observing?" "Mais oui, Hastings," I said. The clever mind always assumes it is being watched. But even the most intelligent mind makes subtle mistakes, leaves micro-traces. And that, my friend, is where we find truth. The black cat believes itself clever, but it cannot hide from observation, deduction, and the power of careful reasoning. By evening, I had compiled a detailed suspect profile, based on behavior, opportunity, knowledge of the manor, and psychological markers. Charles Winthrop, nervous, evasive, with personal motivations, but not entirely consistent with the symbolic pattern. Mr. Linden, new, anxious, capable of manipulation, but primarily a red herring so far. Lady Winthrop, distressed, but with limited opportunity and motive. Mr. Darby, deceased. Yet his death revealed both the killer's escalation and willingness to target intelligent observers. Hastings, exhausted, asked, "Poirot, what now? Can we stop this?" I looked toward the fog-laden windows, my mind calculating the next steps. "Hastings, the breakthrough is this. The killer follows a pattern, is predictable in the sequence of escalation, and communicates via symbolic markers. The next act is imminent. We shall prepare, observe, and anticipate. The black cat thrives on fear, but fear can be countered with knowledge, vigilance, and reason. And when the next move comes, we shall be ready." As night fell over Chiswick Manor, the fog pressed against the walls like a living entity. Somewhere within its silent corridors, the black cat plotted. Somewhere, an intelligent, cruel, and calculating mind planned its next act. And somewhere, Hercule Poirot's little gray cells were already anticipating, calculating, and preparing to intercept. The third murder was both a tragedy and a revelation. It had provided the pattern, the signature, and the insight necessary to anticipate the next step. Yet, it also raised the stakes. The black cat was clever, bold, and evolving. The game had entered its most dangerous phase. And the real challenge, the final unraveling of the killer's mind, was yet to come. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 9. The setup and the night vigil. The fog had become an omnipresent shroud over Chiswick Manor, curling into every corner, seeping beneath doors, and wrapping itself around the ancient trees like a living specter. It was the kind of fog that distorted perception, that rendered familiar corridors strange, that made even the bravest servant glance nervously over their shoulder. The manor itself seemed to exhale a slow, ominous breath that reminded every occupant of the unseen menace that stalked within its walls. I spent the morning meticulously reviewing all evidence from the previous murders. The Black Cat figurines, the cryptic notes, the letters from the secret room, and the sequence of victims. Each element formed part of a deliberate pattern, a choreography of terror and intellect. The murderer was not impulsive, but methodical, enjoying the psychological dominance exercised over the household and over the investigator himself. Hastings, nervous as ever, appeared at my study door, carrying a tray of tea. His eyes were wide, reflecting the tension that had gripped the house. "Poirot, I cannot imagine who could commit such horrors," he said quietly. "3 murders already. And yet, I fear there will be more. It is as if the house itself conspires against us." "Patience, Hastings," I said, arranging the figurines before me. "The Black Cat thrives not only on the act of murder, but on fear, observation, and anticipation. Our task is to turn the tables, to create a scenario in which the killer's next move exposes the mind behind the mask. And for that, one must observe subtlety, opportunity, and human psychology with equal precision." I spent the afternoon preparing. The manor, already steeped in unease, became my laboratory. I relocated the Black Cat figurines strategically, placing one in a dimly lit corridor, another on a side table in the drawing room, and the third near the entrance to the secret room. Each placement was deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction, to draw the killer toward observation points where we could monitor without revealing our presence. Hastings, fidgeting as he assisted me, asked, "Poirot, what if the killer suspects a trap?" "Then, Hastings," I replied with measured calm, "they may act with caution, but even the most cautious mind cannot completely suppress instinct, ego, and desire. A clever mind will always leave traces, however small, and it is these traces that we must read. The Black Cat believes itself invisible, yet it cannot hide from the little gray cells." By late afternoon, I arranged a vigil system. I stationed myself in the library, the room from which I had the clearest view of the corridor leading to the east and west wings. Hastings was assigned to the servants' hall, with a clear line of sight to the main staircase. 2 discreet signals, a small bell and a flickering candle, would alert us to any movement in the hallways. Every servant and family member was instructed to remain in place under the guise of maintaining household order, unaware that they were, in fact, part of the observational plan. I then set subtle psychological cues. Notes were deliberately found in specific places, suggesting secrets uncovered or potential vulnerabilities. One note hinted at a discovery of a hidden letter in the secret room. Another implied that the Black Cat's next victim would be someone with access to both servants and family. These were not lies, but carefully crafted invitations designed to provoke a response from the perpetrator. As evening descended, the manor seemed to grow heavier, the air almost viscous with anticipation. The servants moved quietly, the family remained tense, and the fog pressed against the windows, making familiar rooms seem alien. I took my post in the library, observing every shadow, every flicker of movement. The Black Cat figurines, now strategically positioned, seemed almost alive, each a sentinel watching silently. Hours passed. The manor was still. The household whispered quietly, fearing to break the fragile calm. And then a soft, deliberate footstep echoed from the corridor connecting the west and north wings. My eyes narrowed. "Hastings," I whispered, "the game begins. Observe carefully. The killer approaches." Through the half-open door, a shadow moved with caution, but with purpose. Not clumsy, not uncertain, each step measured, deliberate. The figure paused near the Black Cat on the side table, hesitated briefly, and then adjusted it slightly, as if signaling a message. The subtlety of the action, The attention to the figurine confirmed my suspicions. The perpetrator was here, interacting with our trap. Testing our observation, I signaled Hastings quietly, who acknowledged and took up his position closer to the main staircase, ready to respond. Every heartbeat was magnified in the silence. Every faint creak of the floorboards, every rustle of curtains, became a potential revelation. The shadow advanced further, moving toward the secret room. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was the moment when the killer's pattern, their psychological impulses, and their need for symbolic dominance would betray them. The figure paused at the entrance to the secret room, peering inside. I noted a slight tremor of hesitation, the first observable sign of uncertainty. Even the most confident mind cannot suppress instinctive caution when faced with potential exposure. The Black Cat had interacted with the figurine and notes, yet had been unaware of our silent observation. Then, a faint scraping noise. The figure bent, adjusting or retrieving an object. Perhaps one of the decoy notes or a minor artifact. The act was deliberate, yet in its deliberation, it revealed hand dominance, height, and subtle movements that could be cross-referenced with previous observations. I whispered to Hastings. Notice the hesitation, the slight shift in weight. Observe the hands, the tilt of the head. Every movement is a signature. This mind is clever, but it is not infallible. Suddenly, a small candle flickered, casting the shadow across the corridor wall. The killer paused, glanced briefly toward the library, then continued. The pattern was evident, bold yet cautious, precise yet human. They could not completely suppress reaction. I made a mental note. The next movement would reveal more. The killer's compulsion to assert control over the figurines and notes would drive action, and observation would yield truth. The night was now fully engaged in suspense. A silent duel of intellect and psychology. Hours continued in this tense vigil. The household remained oblivious to the minute psychological battle unfolding in the corridors. Hastings whispered occasional observations, noting changes in movement, subtle shuffling, and the timing of the shadow's interactions. Then, near midnight, the shadow reached for one of the figurines near the secret room, lifting it carefully, almost reverently. At that precise moment, I observed a minor, telltale movement, an almost imperceptible scratch on the floorboard, previously unnoticed. This confirmed my suspicion. The killer was interacting with the objects in a ritualistic manner, following the symbolic sequence. Hastings, barely able to breathe quietly, asked, "Poirot, what does it mean?" "It means, Hastings," I replied, "that the mind behind these murders is obsessed with the symbols, with the sequence, with the performance. And it is here that we will soon expose them not through force, but through the irresistible compulsion of their own psychological design. The Black Cat cannot resist completing the pattern, and in doing so, will reveal itself." The fog pressed harder against the windows. The house seemed to hold its breath. The trap was set. The killer was now engaged, following impulses too strong to resist. Every careful, deliberate step was a clue. Every interaction with a figurine or note was a signature. The night was alive with silent tension, a duel of intellect and nerve. And the breakthrough was imminent. By the early hours of the morning, the shadow's movements indicated a clear pattern. The killer would attempt to retrieve or adjust one final figurine, completing the symbolic sequence. At that moment, Hastings and I were ready, not with confrontation, but with precise observation, patience, and reasoning. The Black Cat, clever, meticulous, and daring, was walking straight into the web of deduction carefully laid by Hercule Poirot. And in that delicate moment, the psychological trap was poised to reveal its secrets. The next murder intercepted by intellect rather than chance. Part 10. The killer revealed the fog that had blanketed Chiswick Manor for days now seemed almost sentient. A living veil of tension, fear, and anticipation. Every corridor, every creaking floorboard, every shadow cast by the flickering candlelight in the vast manor seemed to hum with expectation. For days, the Black Cat had stalked the household, leaving terror, confusion, and cryptic symbols in its wake. The previous murders had been carefully orchestrated. A sequence designed to assert psychological dominance and display intellect. And yet, the night's vigil had brought us to a point where anticipation alone could no longer suffice. Every observation, every subtle gesture recorded during the past days, now converged into a coherent pattern. The time had come for action, not violent confrontation, but the methodical, cerebral, and inevitable exposure of the mind behind the mask. I sat in the library, the flickering shadows of candlelight reflecting off the polished wood, the black cat figurines arranged strategically before me. Hastings, tense, silent, and vigilant, was stationed by the doorway, his eyes darting to the hall at every subtle noise. The household had been instructed to retire to their rooms, all under the guise of following precautionary measures. Yet each was unaware that the trap had been set, their very presence a factor in the psychological theater we were conducting. "Observe, Hastings," I whispered. "The black cat thrives on intellect, control, and compulsion. It is an intricate mind, and it will not resist the pattern it has so carefully constructed. Soon, its own design will betray it." Hours passed. The fog pressed closer to the manor's windows, muffling distant sounds, making every creak in the floorboard or subtle whisper of wind a potential clue. And then, as midnight approached, a movement. A shadow glided from the north wing toward the corridor where the black cat figurines had been placed. The figure was cautious, precise, deliberate, yet not without characteristic gestures that betrayed habit and personality. I observed intently. The shadow paused at the first figurine, hesitated, adjusted its placement slightly, then proceeded to the second, touching it with a careful, almost ritualistic precision. My attention sharpened. Here was a mind compelled to complete a symbolic sequence, an obsession so strong that even the risk of exposure could not override it. "Notice." "Hastings," I murmured. "The compulsion is evident. Observe the hands, the tilt of the head, the weight distribution in the step. Every small movement is a signature." The figure moved toward the final figurine near the entrance to the secret room. At that moment, a soft rustle betrayed the presence of another object the killer seemed to inspect, a decoy note we had deliberately left, suggesting the discovery of sensitive information. The figure's hesitation, a subtle shift in posture, a slight backward glance toward the library, all confirmed what I had suspected. The killer was engaged with the trap. Yet unaware of the precise observation we had conducted, I signaled Hastings quietly, who nodded, his hand resting lightly on the candlestick for support, prepared to intervene only if necessary. But our purpose was not to confront with force, it was to observe, to let the psychology of compulsion and pattern reveal the truth. And then, the breakthrough. The shadow bent to pick up the final figurine. In doing so, the candlelight illuminated a face partially hidden by a hood, yet revealing enough, a subtle familiarity in posture, gait, and mannerisms that immediately connected with our previous deductions. My little gray cells worked rapidly, drawing together all minutiae, behavior patterns, knowledge of hidden corridors, prior reactions to observations, and subtle indicators during the earlier psychological trap. The identity, long obscured by careful manipulation and red herrings, was now visible. It was Charles Winthrop, Lady Winthrop's own nephew. The very person whose nervous glances, torn letters, and apparent agitation had been noted, dismissed, and misinterpreted several times. His motive was now clear in psychological detail, embedded deeply in family history, personal obsession, and the symbolic significance of the Black Cat legend. I whispered to Hastings, who stiffened. "Poirot." "It is him?" "Yes, Hastings," I said softly. "Observe closely. Every step, every hesitation, every interaction confirms the mind. The Black Cat's compulsion has revealed the culprit." Charles, unaware of our observation, continued his ritual, aligning the figurines in the sequence I had anticipated. Each placement was deliberate, calculated, symbolic a representation of control, intimidation, and intellectual superiority. I stepped into the corridor, my voice calm yet commanding. "Monsieur Winthrop, the performance is complete. You have followed the sequence admirably, but the little gray cells have observed all." He froze, the figurines trembling slightly under his fingers. For a moment, disbelief, fear, and pride warred across his features. Then, a faint, controlled smile. The smile of a mind that had anticipated recognition, yet had not expected the depth of insight. Poirot continued. The murders, the choice of victims, the sequence of the figurines, the cryptic notes were all designed to assert superiority, to demonstrate intellect, to manipulate fear. You drew upon family history, the legend of the Black Cat, and the psychological tendencies of your household. And yet, even the most meticulous mind leaves traces, micro-expressions, hesitation, posture, sequence signatures that betray the mind, if observed with patience and care. Charles's voice was low, deliberate, yet tinged with emotion. Poirot, you understand nothing of the pressure, the obligation of the legacy, the family, the secrets. I merely carried it forward. They would not have understood. The Black Cat, the sequence. It is tradition, a test, a necessity. Tradition. I asked, eyes narrowed. A test that kills? A necessity that takes life? Mon Dieu, Monsieur Winthrop. You confuse obsession with obligation. You have allowed pride, intellect, and legend to justify murder. The compulsion you feel, the rituals you perform, are not proof of necessity. They are proof of your weakness, your arrogance, and your desire for control. And that, monsieur, is why the little gray cells have discerned the truth. He stepped back, the weight of realization pressing upon him. And yet, I did not act blindly. The victims, the sequence, the symbolism. It was precise. They understood. Eventually, Hastings, unable to contain himself, whispered, Poirot. Is he proud? I responded softly. Hastings, the mind behind such acts thrives on recognition, on being understood, on asserting superiority. Pride and intellectual vanity can be as deadly as any weapon. I gestured toward the Black Cat figurines. Observe, Hastings. Each figurine marks an act. Each smear of blood represents a signature. Each note a psychological challenge. Charles Winthrop's method is intricate, ritualistic, and deliberate. Yet, it is also human, subject to instinct, error, and observation. And it is observation that has revealed him tonight. Charles looked at the figurines, his hands trembling slightly. You have followed my design? Exactament, I said. Every step, every interaction, every hesitation has been noted. The pattern reveals the mind, and the mind reveals the murderer. You have allowed compulsion, ritual, and pride to betray you. He sank to a chair, exhausted, defeated, yet still with a glimmer of defiance in his eyes. And the Black Cat? The Black Cat is not real, I said calmly. It is a symbol, a construct, a manifestation of your obsession with control, fear, and intellect. You gave it life, you performed its actions, and in doing so, you revealed yourself. The cat is nothing but the reflection of your own mind. For hours, Charles recounted his actions, motivations, and the psychological threads that led him to commit the murders. He spoke of family grudges, the weight of inheritance disputes, the fascination with legend, and the intoxicating sense of power derived from manipulating fear. Each word, carefully chosen, reflected intellect, vanity, and obsession. I listened, my mind noting every nuance, every micro-expression, every contradiction. The evidence was no longer merely circumstantial. It was psychological, behavioral, and symbolic. The murders, once enigmatic and terrifying, were now coherent, a pattern revealed through careful observation and deductive reasoning. Finally, I addressed the household, who had gathered in silent apprehension. Mies Amos, the murderer, has been revealed. Charles Winthrop, driven by obsession, family legacy, and intellectual vanity, has committed these acts. The Black Cat figurines, the notes, the sequence of victims, all were deliberate, symbolic, and psychological. The mystery is resolved, and the mind behind the terror has been exposed. Lady Winthrop, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "My own nephew." How could it be? I placed a gentle hand on her arm. Madame, human minds are complex. Pride, obsession, and psychological compulsion can lead to acts beyond reason. But through patience, observation, and reasoning, even the cleverest mind may be revealed. The fog outside had begun to lift, revealing the first pale rays of dawn. The night of terror, the sequence of murders, and the psychological game of the Black Cat were complete. The killer had been revealed not through force alone, but through the power of deduction, observation, and understanding of the human mind. Charles Winthrop was taken into custody, his psychological unraveling as telling as the physical evidence. The household, though shaken, could finally breathe. The Black Cat figurines, once symbols of fear, now stood as monuments to the unraveling of a complex, obsessive mind. And as I watched the first sunlight touch the manor's ancient walls, I reflected. The game had been perilous, the minds involved intricate. But the solution had emerged through calm reasoning, attention to detail, and the inexorable power of observation. The Black Cat had been revealed, the pattern exposed, and the little gray cells, ever vigilant, had triumphed once more. Part 11. Aftermath and Psychological Analysis. The morning after Charles Winthrop's arrest arrived with a fragile calm over Chiswick Manor. The fog that had cloaked the estate for so many nights had lifted, revealing the skeletal outlines of trees and the cold light of early winter. Yet, the atmosphere inside the house was heavy, not with suspense, as before, but with the lingering shadows of grief, fear, and incomprehension. Lady Winthrop moved silently among the rooms, her face drawn, her hands trembling. The weight of betrayal by a family member, the very nephew she had trusted, pressed upon her like a tangible burden. The servants, though relieved that the killings had ceased, carried expressions of residual terror. Some whispered to one another, others avoided eye contact entirely, unwilling to revisit the horrors of the previous days. I walked through the corridors of the manor with Hastings, observing carefully. Each room, each object, each trace of human presence told a story, not of murder alone, but of the psychological aftermath. Even the Black Cat figurines, now collected and placed on a side table in the library, seemed to bear silent witness to the interplay of obsession, fear, and intellect that had unfolded here. Hastings, I said quietly, observe the household. Though the immediate threat is gone, the psychological impact lingers. Fear has been replaced by grief, and mistrust has settled like dust upon every surface. Recovery from terror is as complex as the events that caused it. Hastings nodded. Indeed, Poirot. I never imagined that one mind could manipulate an entire household so thoroughly. The sequence, the symbolism, the fear, it was overwhelming. Mais oui, Hastings, I said. Charles Winthrop's mind was methodical, ritualistic, and obsessed with control. Each murder was not merely an act of elimination, but a performance, a demonstration of intellect, of mastery over human psychology, and of the symbolic power of the Black Cat. And now, we must understand not only what he did, but why he did it, and how the household must begin to heal. *1. Psychological analysis of the killer Charles's actions were rooted in multiple intertwined psychological factors. Firstly, there was family obsession. He had grown up immersed in stories of the Black Cat legend, a symbolic emblem of betrayal and vigilance within the Winthrop lineage. These stories had imbued him with a sense of inherited responsibility, an almost delusional need to assert his own intellect and moral authority through ritualized acts. Secondly, there was compulsive symbolism. The Black Cat figurines were not merely decorative or incidental, they were instruments of psychological manipulation. Their placement, the sequence of bloodstains, and the cryptic notes were meticulously designed to communicate dominance, fear, and intellectual superiority. Each figurine represented a stage in the narrative, a visible manifestation of control, and a marker of the killer's obsession with ritual. Thirdly, escalation and sequence played a critical role. Each murder was progressively daring, deliberate, and psychologically provocative. The first victim, Mrs. Delaney, was vulnerable and unobtrusive. The second, Miss Prescott, was a visiting relative, chosen to maximize fear. The third, Mr. Darby, was observant and intelligent, representing a challenge to the killer's own intellectual superiority. This pattern revealed a mind fixated on control and escalation, confident yet compelled by its own psychological design. Lastly, there was vanity and intellectual pride. Charles thrived on the perception of cleverness. The Black Cat murders were not only a means to eliminate perceived threats or settle symbolic scores. They were also a performance, a demonstration of his own ingenuity. In doing so, he left subtle traces, gestures, hesitation, posture, and interaction with objects that ultimately revealed his identity to a keen observer. 2. Family. Consequences. Lady Winthrop's grief was compounded by the betrayal of blood. Trust, already fragile in households shadowed by secrecy and old disputes, had been shattered. She expressed both sorrow and disbelief. How could a young, intelligent relative, raised within her own home, commit such calculated horrors? The family estate, with its secret rooms, hidden letters, and centuries-old feuds, had contributed to the psychological environment that allowed such obsession to flourish. Generational conflicts, inheritance disputes, and fascination with legend had created fertile ground for Charles's mind to distort reality and justify murder. Furthermore, the remaining family members now faced the burden of rebuilding trust. Every relationship within the household had been strained by fear, suspicion, and the realization that intellectual brilliance, when untethered from moral restraint, could lead to profound destruction. Healing would require careful attention to emotional recovery, transparency, an open discussion of the events that had transpired. 3. The symbolism of the Black Cat. The Black Cat figurines had been central to the psychological drama. Initially, they seemed merely decorative, perhaps an eccentric touch in a house steeped in antiquity. Yet they became instruments of fear, markers of ritual, and tools for the killer to assert intellectual dominance. The first figurine, clean, unmarked, was a test, a subtle communication to the household and investigator, indicating capability and presence. The second figurine, with a faint blood mark, signaled escalation, a warning, and the progression of the ritual. The third figurine, smeared with blood, was a statement of mastery, a declaration that the sequence and performance had been successful. Through the figurines, Charles communicated without words, relying on observation, fear, and symbolism to influence behavior. This demonstrates the psychological potency of symbols, particularly when wielded by an intelligent and obsessive mind. 4. Poirot's deduction. Reflections. In reviewing the case, I reflected on several key principles that led to the successful resolution. Observation of micro-behavioral cues, small gestures, hesitation, and posture revealed psychological signatures that the killer could not suppress. Understanding the interplay of fear and compulsion, Charles's ritualistic behavior was driven by obsession and pride. The psychological trap exploited these tendencies. Historical and familial context, knowledge of the family feud, secret letters, and legends provided insight into motive, enabling prediction of future actions. Symbolic analysis. The Black Cat figurines were more than objects. They were tools of communication, which, when interpreted correctly, revealed sequence, intent, and identity. Hastings, ever eager to simplify, asked, "Poirot, it all seems so complicated. Couldn't anyone have guessed?" I smiled faintly. "Hastings, it is not only intelligence that solves a mystery, but understanding of mind, motive, and symbol." The Black Cat case was resolved because observation was coupled with reason, and deduction combined with psychological insight. That is the difference between guesswork and true detection. 5. Restoring order. The remaining days at Chiswick Manor were devoted to restoring equilibrium. The Black Cat figurines were placed in a secure display, symbolic but harmless. Letters and historical documents were catalogued and preserved. Lady Winthrop, with a mixture of sorrow and relief, began to address the psychological needs of her household. Reassuring staff and family that safety had been restored, I spent time advising on household security, emphasizing monitoring, careful record-keeping, and attention to human behavior. While the immediate threat was removed, the psychological scars were more persistent. Fear leaves marks that physical wounds do not. Rebuilding trust required patience, transparency, and deliberate attention. 6. Final reflections on the nature of evil. The Black Cat murders illustrate a critical truth. intellect, when divorced from morality and empathy, can become lethal. Charles Winthrop's brilliance, pride, and obsession drove him to acts of murder that were both calculated and symbolic. His mind constructed an entire narrative of dominance and fear, using history, symbolism, and ritual to manipulate his environment and challenge observers. Yet, as this case demonstrates, even the most meticulous mind cannot entirely escape observation, reasoning, and deduction. Every act of obsession leaves traces, however subtle, observable to those who combine careful attention with insight into human psychology. The little gray cells, patient and deliberate, remain the ultimate arbiter in unraveling the complexities of such minds. As I prepared to depart Chiswick Manor, Hastings by my side, the fog had lifted entirely, revealing the gardens and trees with crisp clarity. The household, though changed, was beginning to breathe again. The legacy of the Black Cat, the fear, the ritual, the deaths would remain a cautionary tale. But its mystery had been solved, its perpetrator apprehended, and its psychological intricacies exposed. Hastings broke the silence. "Poirot, it is over?" "For now, Hastings," I replied. "The Black Cat has been revealed, the pattern deciphered, and the mind exposed. But remember, the study of human nature is endless, and even when evil is understood, the consequences linger. Observation, patience, and reason are our only safeguards against repetition." And as we walked from the manor into the crisp winter morning, I reflected. The Black Cat had been clever, cunning, and cruel, but intellect without morality is always vulnerable to the patient, observant, and reasoning mind of the detective. Chiswick Manor was silent. The shadows of fear had lifted, and yet the lessons of obsession, symbolism, and the human mind would endure, etched indelibly into the history of the Winthrop family, and into the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. Part 12. Hidden motives and subplots. The weeks following Charles Winthrop's arrest were a curious mixture of relief, tension, and lingering uncertainty. Chiswick Manor, once a theater of fear, now resembled a house attempting to recover from a storm. Yet beneath the restored order, subtle currents of unease persisted. For even though the Black Cat's reign of terror had ended, the deeper truths of the family, its secrets, and the complex interplay of motives and allegiances were only beginning to emerge. I had stayed at the manor by Lady Winthrop's request, to offer counsel and to help piece together the remaining puzzles that lay obscured by the recent murders. Hastings as ever accompanied me, though he had grown visibly weary. The tension of the past weeks etched into his features. "Poirot," he said one morning, as we strolled through the gardens still wet with early winter frost, "I cannot imagine that all these events, were simply the work of one man. There must be more, some hidden motives, secrets that even Charles himself could not have imagined." "Ah, Hastings," I replied, smiling faintly, "you are beginning to perceive the true complexity of human nature. One act may have a visible hand, yet behind it, currents and whispers, alliances and jealousies extend far beyond immediate perception. The Black Cat case is no exception. Observe, even in the aftermath, subtle tensions suggest hidden layers. *1. The case of the missing letters. While organizing the library and secret room, I discovered a small bundle of letters that had not yet been examined. Unlike the ones Charles had used, these letters were personal correspondences between various Winthrop family members and distant relatives, some benign, others suffused with subtle threats, veiled complaints, or ambiguous insinuations. Among them was a letter from a long-forgotten cousin, Reginald Haversham, to Lady Winthrop herself. It hinted at knowledge of the Black Cat legend, speaking cryptically of unfinished business and retribution that time cannot erase. While Reginald had long been presumed dead or estranged, the existence of this correspondence suggested that family intrigue extended further back, and perhaps influenced Charles's perception of duty and vengeance. Another letter, unsigned but written in a familiar hand, mentioned the possible existence of hidden assets within the manor. This revelation suggested that financial motivation, while not the primary factor in the murders, had been a latent influence, stirring jealousy, suspicion, and the desire for control. Poirot, do you think Charles knew of these letters? Hastings asked. Mais oui, Hastings, I replied. But he may not have fully understood their implications. Knowledge of hidden wealth, of historical grudges, and symbolic narratives amplifies obsession. It adds layers to motive. Observe, what is perceived as a single thread often conceals a tapestry of subtle influences. 2. The mysterious housekeeper during my review of household interactions. The figure of Mrs. Whitcomb, the long-serving housekeeper, emerged as particularly interesting. Though she had shown no overt malice or suspicious behavior, her extensive knowledge of the manor, its secret rooms, and hidden corridors gave her a subtle power within the household. I requested a private conversation with her. Sitting quietly by the drawing-room fire, she revealed details that, while minor in isolation, added depth to the unfolding narrative. She had observed Charles sneaking into the secret room weeks before the murders, though she had assumed he was investigating family documents or pursuing curiosity. She had found certain letters misplaced or destroyed, suggesting that she may have unknowingly interfered with Charles's plans, contributing indirectly to his escalating tension and obsession. She mentioned a rumor of a distant relative still alive, who might have resented the Winthrop legacy and left clues intended to provoke Charles's sense of responsibility and ritual. Her knowledge was subtle, yet significant. Though she had no part in the murders themselves, her actions or inactions had shaped the context in which Charles had acted. 3. The case of the hidden room below the manor. Upon further inspection of the manor, I discovered another small hidden chamber, located beneath the west wing, a room that had escaped all previous attention. Within were dusty trunks containing old family portraits, some defaced or torn, suggesting interpersonal conflicts and historical grudges. Ledgers and financial records, hinting at discrepancies in inheritance claims. Small trinkets, including miniature black cat figurines of varied designs, some broken, some intact, suggesting that the symbolic obsession with the black cat had been cultivated over generations. This chamber revealed that Charles was not the first in the family to be influenced by the legend. The obsession, the compulsion toward ritual, and the use of symbolic objects were, in a sense, inherited psychologically encoded into the environment of Chiswick Manor. Hastings, peering into the dark room, murmured, "Poirot, it's as if the house itself conspires to perpetuate obsession." Precisely, Hastings, I said. The environment, family history, and hidden symbols create fertile ground for certain minds to distort reality. What seems like personal choice is often shaped by legacy, circumstance, and psychology. 4. Financial and inheritance subplots. Digging deeper into the ledgers and letters, I noted several points of intrigue. Certain distant relatives had claimed portions of the estate, yet documentation was ambiguous. A trust fund, intended for Lady Winthrop's descendants, had been mismanaged by advisors, creating financial tension. Charles, aware of these discrepancies, had interpreted them as threats to family honor, heightening his compulsion to act in accordance with the Black Cat legend. While greed had not been the principal motive, the convergence of financial anxiety, familial pride, and ritualistic compulsion created a complex backdrop that shaped Charles's psychological state. The murders were not merely acts of personal vendetta. They were intertwined with family intrigue and historical grievances. 5. Secondary characters and hidden motives. Several other household figures emerged as holding subtle secrets. Miss Prescott, the second victim, had been investigating family history herself, unaware that her curiosity made her a target. Her actions unintentionally threatened Charles's carefully constructed symbolic narrative. Mr. Darby, observant and intelligent, had begun questioning Charles's activities before his death. His inquiries, though rational and innocent, provoked the killer's sense of exposure. The servants, though largely uninvolved, had minor secrets, misplaced objects, forgotten messages that contributed indirectly to tension, suspicion, and mysterication. Each subplot, while minor, influenced the timing, selection of victims, and the psychological escalation that had made the murders so effective. 6. Lady Winthrop's reflections. Lady Winthrop, resilient yet shaken, confided in me her own reflections. Monsieur Poirot, I realize now that the estate, the legends, and the secrecy all contributed to what happened. Charles. He was brilliant, but so confined by expectations, by stories, by history. I can see now how he convinced himself that these acts were necessary, though nothing could justify them. Her insight underscored the broader truth of the case. Environment, history, and symbolic narratives can warp perception, allowing rationalizations that mask moral failure. The Black Cat was as much a mirror of Charles's mind as it was an instrument of fear. 7. Unresolved questions and subtle twists even after Charles's capture. Several minor mysteries lingered. Who exactly was the distant relative mentioned in Mrs. Whitcomb's hints? Could they have played a role in cultivating Charles's obsession? Were there other hidden rooms or artifacts within Chiswick Manor, waiting to shape the behavior of future generations? Could the Black Cat legend itself evolve, influencing other family members in unexpected ways? These questions, though minor, suggested that while the immediate danger was over, the legacy of the Black Cat remained a complex psychological and symbolic presence in the household. 8. Poirot's final reflections on the subplots. In reviewing these layers of intrigue, I noted several critical lessons. Human behavior is multidimensional. Overt actions may reveal one layer, but underlying influences history, family dynamics, symbolism shape motives in profound ways. Minor actors can have major influence, even those not directly involved in the murders, contributed to the psychological environment. Legacy and environment shape obsession. Symbolic artifacts, secret rooms, and family legends create fertile ground for ritualistic behavior. Resolution requires holistic understanding. Solving a crime requires not only observation of immediate events, but comprehension of historical, symbolic, and interpersonal layers. Hastings, peering thoughtfully at me, murmured, Poirot, this case is more than a mystery. It is a study of human nature. Indeed, Hastings, I said, and Chiswick Manor serves as a lesson. Intelligence, history, and environment, when combined with obsession, can be dangerous. But with patience, observation, and reasoning, even the most intricate web can be untangled. As the weeks passed, the household gradually resumed normal activity. The Black Cat figurines were preserved, letters catalogued, and the hidden rooms secured. Lady Winthrop took steps to restore trust among remaining family members and staff, while reflecting on the complex legacy that had given rise to the murders. And I, ever vigilant, observed not only the resolution of crime, but the subtle interplay of motives, psychology, and legacy, understanding that the story of the Black Cat was not merely one of murder, but of human complexity, obsession, and the intricate forces that shape behavior across generations. Chiswick Manor had survived the terror. The Black Cat had been revealed, the main threat neutralized, yet its lessons would linger, like shadows in the corridors, reminding all who lived there that intelligence and obsession are powerful forces, capable of creation or destruction, depending on the moral compass of the mind that wields them. Part 13. Lingering shadows and foreshadowing winter had fully settled over Chiswick Manor. The frost lay thick on the lawns. Glass windows shimmered with ice, and the skeletal trees cast intricate shadows over the grounds. From the outside, the estate seemed serene, a stately house wrapped in stillness. Yet within the walls, the atmosphere remained taut with residual tension, subtle unease, and unspoken questions. Though the Black Cat had been revealed and its principal architect, Charles Winthrop, removed from the household, the consequences of obsession, secrecy, and legacy were far from concluded. I spent the early morning walking through the corridors, Hastings quietly accompanying me. The house, though ostensibly calm, was laden with the psychological weight of previous events. Small details, which might have been overlooked by ordinary observers, seemed imbued with latent meaning. A faint scratch on the floorboard in the library, a displaced trinket in the secret room, a lock slightly misaligned in a seldom-used door. Each element spoke not of murder, but of lingering disturbance, a hint that the Black Cat's influence, subtle yet insistent, had not fully dissipated. Hastings, I said quietly, Observe this house. The principal danger is gone, yes, but the shadows remain. Memory, fear, and obsession linger longer than the acts that caused them. Even now, subtle patterns suggest that the psychological residue of the black cat remains active, shaping behavior, expectations, and caution. Hastings shivered slightly. Poirot, do you truly mean that danger persists? Perhaps not danger in the immediate sense, Hastings, I replied, but the potential for tension, misinterpretation, and anxiety endures. The black cat is as much a state of mind as a physical presence. Where minds are influenced by obsession, history, and ritual, shadows endure long after the body of crime has been removed. 1. Unsettled households and lingering fear, even after Charles's removal. Household members displayed subtle, almost unconscious signs of distress. Lady Winthrop moved through the house with hesitancy, touching objects carefully as though wary of residual danger. She constantly checked locks, corners, and hidden spaces, a habit ingrained by months of fear. The servants, though outwardly compliant, spoke in whispers, paused in hallways, and avoided each other's eyes, a residue of mistrust. Minor quarrels flared subtly, each interaction tinged with unease. Family members, particularly younger Winthrops, seemed almost hyper-vigilant. Their sleep was fitful, their curiosity mingled with apprehension, and their fascination with the black cat legend was now tinged with fear rather than playful interest. These behaviors, while minor, suggested a broader truth: the psychological impact of Charles's manipulations. The ritualized murders and the symbolic use of the black cat had fundamentally altered the household dynamic. Recovery required more than mere cessation of criminal acts. It demanded time, patience, and careful guidance. 2. Minor threats and unexplained events, even with the principal culprit removed. Subtle incidents suggested that all was not entirely resolved. Footsteps in empty corridors. At night, faint footsteps were sometimes heard on the second floor, where no one was officially present. Hastings initially assumed it was residual fear causing hallucinations, but repeated reports by servants confirmed the noises were real. Displaced objects, trinkets, letters, and figurines occasionally appeared slightly moved, despite thorough searches. This suggested either carelessness, unconscious fear responses, or perhaps someone still testing boundaries. Cryptic messages. One morning, a note appeared in the library. Reading only. The game is not over. Though it lacked signature, its timing and style suggested psychological play rather than physical threat. I examined the handwriting, ink, and paper carefully. While no immediate danger could be confirmed, the note functioned as a reminder that Chiswick Manor was a house of symbols and legacy, where residual obsession could persist. 3. Foreshadowing. A distant observer. During my inspection of the hidden rooms, I discovered subtle traces of a visitor who had gone unnoticed during the black cat's reign. A faint footprint in dust leading from a service entrance to the east wing. A small token, a pin with a distinctive emblem, placed on a shelf with no apparent explanation. A partially burnt letter in the fireplace, containing cryptic words implying that someone outside the household had observed or influenced Charles. These findings suggested the presence of a distant observer, possibly a family member, acquaintance, or rival with a vested interest in the black cat legend or the Winthrop estate. Though they had not committed acts of murder, their indirect influence, through subtle suggestion, historical narrative, or encouragement, might have contributed to Charles's obsession. Hastings, I murmured, observe this. Even after the main danger is neutralized, indirect influences may persist. Minds are shaped by observation, suggestion, and history. This distant observer may never act directly, but their presence is a factor in the residual tension. 4. Re-emergence of old legends. As I spoke with Lady Winthrop, she revealed that several ancient family legends, previously dormant, had begun to resurface in conversation among the household staff. Stories of past black cat incidents, allegedly centuries old, involving family disputes, vanished heirs, and mysterious deaths. Whispered tales that the black cat was more than a symbol and omen, a manifestation of familial guilt and pride, or even a literal protector of family secrets. References to hidden passages, false walls, and concealed compartments not yet fully explored. These legends, though largely mythological, reinforced the psychological framework in which the Black Cat case had occurred. They perpetuated anxiety, curiosity, and tension, serving as a form of indirect influence on the household psyche. 5. The role of psychological residue in my reflections. I noted that the events of the Black Cat murders had left a psychological residue, evident in subtle behaviors, ongoing anxiety, and even small accidents or misunderstandings. Servants occasionally misreported routine incidents, a manifestation of hypervigilance. Family members misinterpreted minor events, doors left ajar, objects moved to suggest lingering threats. Lady Winthrop herself sometimes felt the weight of oversight, suspecting anomalies that were in fact ordinary occurrences. These signs confirmed a critical truth: the effects of obsession, fear, and manipulation can persist long after the act itself has ceased. The human mind remembers, interprets, and anticipates in ways that sustain psychological tension. 6. Subtle intrigue, financial and inheritance threads. While Charles Winthrop had been the primary actor in the murders, the hidden financial threads of the estate remained partially unresolved. Some distant relatives had vague claims on minor properties, now complicated by Charles's absence and partial destruction of documents. Certain ledgers hinted at overlooked inheritances, whose rediscovery could spark renewed disputes or minor intrigue. The possibility of mismanaged assets and hidden treasures suggested that, even after the terror, subtle conflicts could arise less dramatic than murder, but still capable of affecting household dynamics. Hastings remarked. Poirot. It seems the story of the Black Cat isn't truly finished, even now. Precisely, Hastings, I replied. Stories, especially those embedded in history, legend, and human ambition, rarely conclude neatly. The immediate danger is gone, but subtler forces, envy, curiosity, fear, and legacy continue to operate. 7. The unseen watcher and future implications. Finally, my most significant observation emerged from repeated examination of the secret rooms and hidden chambers. There were small traces of recent activity, distinct from Charles's known movements, suggesting someone had accessed these rooms after the main events. The method of access, a cleverly disguised panel in the west wing, was subtle, requiring knowledge of the manor's historical design. Objects were subtly moved, perhaps as a form of psychological signaling, a test for remaining family members, or a gentle exercise of control, though no immediate threat existed. This unseen watcher implied that Chiswick Manor remained a site of subtle influence, observation, and minor intrigue, preserving the tension of the Black Cat legend for future events. 8. Poirot's reflections. I reflected at length on the lingering shadows of the case. Threats do not vanish entirely. Removal of the primary actor ends violence, but psychological tension persists. Symbols, rituals, and legends endure. They shape behavior long after their origin. Minor actors and observers matter. Even indirect influence can catalyze obsession and fear. Family legacy is complex inheritance, pride, and history perpetuate patterns of behavior that outlive the individuals involved. Observation remains paramount. Even subtle disturbances can reveal psychological truths and foreshadow future events. Hastings, observing my notes, whispered, Poirot, do you think the Black Cat could return in some form? Ah, Hastings, I said, eyes thoughtful, the Black Cat is never truly gone. Legends, fear, and obsession endure. Though the immediate threat is over, the subtle shadows remain. Those who inhabit the manor, and those who remember the legend, are never entirely free from its influence. 9. Closure with a hint of suspense. By late afternoon, Lady Winthrop had begun to restore routine. Servants were reassured, minor disputes addressed, and the household started to regain calm. Yet, as I prepared to leave the secret room, a slight sound caught my attention, a whisper, or perhaps a draft brushing against the walls, followed by a faint glimmer of a reflective surface in a corner previously unnoticed. I smiled faintly to myself. The Black Cat's legacy, though subdued, remained. In the human mind, symbols endure. In history, legends persist. And in a house like Chiswick Manor, even after death and revelation, the shadows of obsession and intrigue continue to watch, subtle, silent, and ever-present. *** Part 14. Unexpected revelations and new twists. Winter had deepened over Chiswick Manor, blanketing the estate in a thick silence broken only by the occasional crackle of frost underfoot. From outside, the manor appeared perfectly still, untouched by recent horrors. Yet within, the psychological landscape remained far from calm. Though Charles Winthrop had been removed, the consequences of his actions, the unresolved secrets of the family, and the subtle currents of influence he had set in motion persisted unseen, but palpable. I had remained at the manor at Lady Winthrop's request, both as consultant and observer. Hastings, still recovering from weeks of tension, remained my companion, though his usual cheer had been subdued by the lingering unease that seemed to pervade every corridor. It was clear that Chiswick Manor, with its labyrinthine passages, hidden rooms, and centuries of history, still held mysteries beyond those Charles had exploited. 1. The arrival of a mysterious visitor on a crisp morning. Just as the frost began to melt under the weak winter sun, a carriage approached the manor. Its polished wheels and careful precision suggested a visitor of consequence. Lady Winthrop, curious yet cautious, greeted the newcomer, a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed, with an air of intelligence and subtle authority. He introduced himself as Dr. Elias Forsyth, a distant historian specializing in antiquarian, family estates, and legends. Dr. Forsyth had written extensively on the Winthrop lineage, particularly the history of the Black Cat legend. Though he claimed only academic interest, the immediacy of his visit suggested that he had uncovered knowledge relevant to current events, knowledge that could illuminate or further complicate the unresolved tensions within the manor. From the moment of his arrival, Hastings sensed a certain covert intensity. "Poirot," he whispered, "there is something in the way he observes the house. The walls, the corridors. It is as if he is already aware of more than he should be." "Ah, Hastings," I murmured. The eyes of a seasoned historian notice what others overlook. But observation is double-edged. One may see both history and secrets intertwined. Let us see what Dr. Forsyth brings to light. 2. A secret document discovered. Dr. Forsyth requested permission to examine the hidden chambers. With Lady Winthrop's reluctant consent, he and I entered the newly discovered West Wing room. Among the dusty ledgers and Black Cat figurines, he paused before an ancient, leather-bound journal. "Ah," he murmured. "This belonged to Edmund Winthrop, circa 1784. Remarkable. There are entries here regarding rituals, symbols, and disputes over inheritance, which mirror the legend of the Black Cat. Observe, the rituals are almost identical to those Charles followed, albeit in symbolic form rather than lethal." I leaned closer, examining the journal. It contained meticulous notes, instructions for the placement of symbolic objects, notes on ceremonial timing, and cryptic references to family retribution. In particular, there was mention of a hidden legacy, a treasure concealed within the manor, accessible only to those who correctly interpreted the Black Cat sequence. Hastings gasped. "Poirot, are you suggesting Charles knew about this treasure?" "Perhaps not fully, Hastings," I said, "but the legend and its symbolic framework clearly influenced him. Charles interpreted history and ritual through his own obsessive lens. The journal confirms that the Black Cat tradition predates him by centuries and is intertwined with inheritance, secrecy, and family rivalry. 3. Unanticipated family secrets. Dr. Forsyth then revealed another astonishing discovery. Hidden within the pages of the journal was a folded letter, written in cipher. Together we decoded it, revealing the following information. Charles was not acting entirely alone in his obsession. Several distant relatives, long estranged, had subtly encouraged interest in the Black Cat legend, leaving hints and suggestions that Charles, eager to assert intellectual dominance, had interpreted as mandates for action. A branch of the Winthrop family, thought extinct, had survived in secrecy, maintaining knowledge of the Black Cat's rituals and its symbolic treasures. The letter implied that Charles's obsession had been indirectly cultivated, not merely by personal pride, but by historical manipulation. This revelation reframed the case entirely. Charles had been a pawn as much as a perpetrator. His actions, though lethal, were influenced by forces beyond his immediate perception, a hidden network of legacy and intrigue stretching across decades. 4. The role of a second shadow. While examining the manor grounds that afternoon, Hastings and I noticed something peculiar. A figure had been observed near the estate perimeter, moving silently among the trees and outbuildings, avoiding detection but clearly watching. We followed the trace cautiously and discovered a small hidden cache, a set of letters from unknown correspondents, hinting at knowledge of Charles's plans. Maps of the manor, including secret passages not yet discovered by the family or staff. A journal containing notes on observation, behavioral prediction, and the Black Cat sequence. It became clear someone had been actively monitoring the household, anticipating Charles's actions and preparing contingencies. While no murders had been committed by this second observer, their presence introduced the possibility of further intrigue and subtle manipulation. Hastings whispered nervously, "Poirot, do you think this second shadow had a hand in the murders?" "Not directly, Hastings," I replied. "But influence alone can shape decisions, compel action, and amplify obsession. The Black Cat's story is not finished. We are merely witnessing the next layer." 5. Minor revelations among the household. Meanwhile, the family and staff revealed previously unknown secrets that added complexity. The maid, Eliza, confessed that she had occasionally overheard Charles speaking in cryptic terms about instructions from unseen relatives. These conversations, trivial at the time, had foreshadowed his obsession. Lady Winthrop's cousin, Marguerite, admitted to subtly feeding Charles with historical anecdotes and letters from distant family members, believing she was encouraging intellectual curiosity without realizing the dangerous consequences. The butler, Mr. Henshaw, revealed that certain objects in the secret rooms had been intentionally moved or miscatalogued over decades, perhaps as part of a larger family ritual now partially interpreted by Charles. Each revelation layered further complexity. Charles had been influenced by external pressures, internal ambition, and historical legacy simultaneously. The story was no longer merely about one murderer. It was about a web of influence, secrecy, and obsession stretching back generations. 6. Discovery of another hidden room. Dr. Forsyth then led us to a wall in the east wing, previously thought solid. Using careful measurements and historical architectural clues, he discovered another hidden chamber, far larger than any previously found. Within, ancient chests containing family relics, including portraits, ceremonial garments, and miniature Black Cat figurines dating back over 2 centuries. Hidden ledgers and maps suggesting that the manor contained additional secret passages, some leading outside the property. Letters and journals indicating the existence of a guardian of the Black Cat, an individual tasked with preserving knowledge of the rituals and sequence, potentially still alive and observing. This discovery suggested that the Black Cat's legacy was intentionally preserved, with Charles's actions being only one iteration of a centuries-old tradition of ritual, observation, and secrecy. 7. Financial and symbolic convergence. Analysis of the journals, ledgers, and letters revealed an astonishing convergence. Financial mismanagement and inheritance disputes had created fertile tension for manipulation. Symbolic sequences, rituals, and historical artifacts had guided decisions and influenced behavior. Psychological pressure applied through letters, subtle observation, and legend had nudged Charles toward his actions, illustrating the complex interplay of legacy, obsession, and opportunity. The Black Cat was not merely a singular influence. It was an orchestrated web of symbolic, financial, and psychological forces, capable of shaping decisions and predicting responses with frightening precision. 8. The role of Dr. Forsyth. Dr. Forsyth, despite his calm demeanor, revealed a personal stake. He explained that his family had historically clashed with the Winthrops, particularly in disputes over black cat rituals and hidden wealth. While he claimed no involvement in the murders, his knowledge and presence suggested that he had been observing, perhaps even subtly influencing events. For years, this revelation added a new layer. The black cat mystery extended beyond the immediate household, involving distant relatives, historians, and guardians of family legacy. Chiswick Manor was revealed to be a nexus of historical intrigue, psychological manipulation, and potential danger. Its secrets preserved carefully over generations. 9. Psychological implications. The case now demonstrated multiple layers of influence. Primary actor, Charles Winthrop, driven by pride, obsession, and compulsion. Secondary influences, distant relatives, minor family actors, and household participants, all subtly shaping perception. Historical legacy. The centuries-old black cat legend, secret passages, and symbolic rituals guiding decisions. External observers, Dr. Forsyth and unknown guardians monitoring, advising, or preserving the system. The psychological complexity of the case was staggering. Murder had been only one expression of the black cat's influence. The broader phenomenon involved manipulation, observation, and symbolic performance extending across generations. 10. Foreshadowing and remaining mysteries as the day drew to a close. Several unresolved questions remained. Who were the hidden guardians of the black cat? Could they act in the future? Were other descendants or distant relatives still observing, planning, or testing the family? What additional treasures or secrets remained hidden in undiscovered rooms? Could obsession, legend, and symbolic influence recur, potentially creating another iteration of the black cat phenomenon? The mansion, though quiet, was far from inert. Its corridors, hidden rooms, and relics suggested a continuing cycle of intrigue and suspense, waiting for the next mind to engage with its symbols. 11. Poirot's reflections standing in the grand library. Hastings beside me, I reflected. The black cat is not merely a murderer. It is a complex system of influence, a psychological, historical, and symbolic construct, capable of guiding behavior. Charles Winthrop acted lethally, but his actions were embedded in a network of unseen pressures, ancestral manipulation, and ritualized guidance. Removal of the actor resolves immediate danger, but the underlying forces, the legacy, observation, and symbolism remain. Hastings asked quietly, "Poirot, do you believe the story will ever end?" "Ah, Hastings," I said, "the story of the black cat is eternal, insofar as human minds, legacy, and symbols endure. Each generation may interpret, observe, and act differently, but the underlying pattern persists. What we have witnessed is only one chapter. The manor, the family, and the legend will continue to influence those who inhabit it, subtly or overtly. Vigilance and understanding are the only safeguards." As the sun set over Chiswick Manor, casting long shadows over the frost-covered grounds, I realized that the black cat was more than a mystery. It was a living, psychological phenomenon, one whose influence transcended murder, shaping minds, actions, and legacies across generations. Even in silence, the house seemed to watch, and the shadows of the black cat lingered. Patient, subtle, and eternal. Part 15. The Guardian revealed and the final confrontation set up. The days following Dr. Forsyth's revelations carried an uneasy weight through Chiswick Manor. Though the principal murders were concluded, the uncovering of secret rooms, hidden journals, and distant relatives hinted at a far deeper network, one in which Charles Winthrop had been only a participant, and not the originator. The black cat legend, it seemed, extended its influence beyond the walls of the house, shaping human behavior in ways subtle, deliberate, and sometimes deadly. I spent my mornings meticulously inspecting the manor, walking its hallways, examining the secret chambers, and observing the household. Even after weeks of relative calm, I noticed the residual tension in gestures, pauses, and speech. The staff moved cautiously, the family spoke in measured tones, and the young Winthrops exhibited a watchfulness that suggested an ingrained fear. But the most significant discovery was yet to come. 1. An ominous clue late one afternoon. While examining the hidden east wing chamber with Dr. Forsyth, I noticed a small, faint inscription on the wooden beam above a previously overlooked alcove. It was a symbol of Black Cat etched centuries ago, partially concealed by years of dust and paint. Beneath it, faint initials were visible. E. Presumably Edmund Winthrop, the ancestor whose journal had guided much of our understanding. Dr. Forsyth examined it carefully. "Ah, Poirot? This is an identifier. Only certain members of the family, or those trained in the rituals, would recognize and understand its significance. It suggests a person, perhaps a guardian, remains aware, watching, waiting for the correct interpretation of the Black Cat sequence." I nodded. "Exactly, Dr. Forsyth. And it is this individual who holds the true key to understanding the depth of the Black Cat legacy." Charles acted within the web, but he was blind to the full hierarchy of guardianship. The real mastermind is, perhaps, not the killer we apprehended, but one who orchestrates from the shadows. Hastings, peering over the alcove, whispered nervously, "Poirot, do you think this person could still pose a threat?" "Threat? Hastings? Perhaps. Influence? Almost certainly. Observe, the Black Cat is more than an individual. It is a system, a tradition, a set of symbolic forces. And systems, unlike men, are patient and enduring." 2. The arrival of the guardian that evening. A visitor arrived unexpectedly. Lady Winthrop, cautious yet polite, received the man in the drawing room. He was tall, elegant, with a calm, commanding presence, dressed in a manner that suggested both refinement and subtle authority. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Nathaniel Crowe, claiming knowledge of family history and lineage, but there was something more, something innately vigilant about him. He observed the household, the walls, and even the furniture with meticulous attention, as if reading hidden messages in ordinary objects. Hastings leaned close and muttered, "Poirot, I've never seen someone so deliberate." There's a weight behind his gaze. I nodded. "Hastings, this is no ordinary historian. He is what the journals, the letters, and the hidden rooms hinted at, the guardian of the Black Cat. His role is subtle, yet profoundly influential. Observe carefully every movement, gesture, and remark will reveal clues about his purpose." 3. Nathaniel Crowe's knowledge during the course of the evening. Mr. Crowe displayed astonishing knowledge. He could identify all hidden rooms and passages within the manor. He correctly interpreted the symbolic sequence of the Black Cat figurines, including subtle variances Charles had introduced. He knew precisely which family members had contributed, inadvertently, to the psychological climate that had enabled Charles's crimes. He possessed letters and minor artifacts, suggesting ongoing surveillance and guidance over the Black Cat legacy, though without direct interference in Charles's murders. Lady Winthrop, visibly unsettled, asked, "Mr. Crowe, why now? Why reveal yourself?" Mr. Crowe's calm gaze met hers. "Lady Winthrop, my role has always been to observe, not to act. The Black Cat is a tradition, a psychological and symbolic system. When Charles Winthrop began to act lethally, it became imperative to monitor, contain, and preserve the legacy. My arrival ensures that the line between tradition and catastrophe does not blur further." 4. A hidden threat emerges despite his calm demeanor. Crowe's presence revealed a subtle threat. He indicated that other distant relatives and observers remained in contact, monitoring the estate through letters, coded messages, and minor interventions. Charles's obsession, it seemed, had been part of a larger psychological test, or at least part of a prolonged observation of how the Black Cat tradition influenced minds. Crowe's revelations were chilling. The Black Cat legacy was intentional in design, preserved to shape behavior across generations. Charles was influenced, but other actors were prepared to intervene if he had escalated further. Even after his removal, the house and its artifacts contained hidden instructions and symbols that could continue to manipulate or challenge future inhabitants. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, is this man a friend? Or a threat?" I replied thoughtfully, "Hastings, he is neither purely friend nor purely enemy. He is a guardian, a moderator of human behavior, a preserver of tradition. But like any intelligent mind aware of power, his influence carries weight. Observation itself can be a subtle form of control. 5. Revealing additional family secrets over several days. Crow disclosed previously unknown family secrets, a hidden branch of the Winthrop lineage, descendants who had remained obscure, avoiding detection and sometimes feeding subtle influence through letters and artifacts. An ancient pact among family elders regarding the Black Cat sequence, a set of rules and moral guidelines for its practice, designed to prevent lethal outcomes while preserving symbolic ritual. The location of symbolic treasures, hidden in secret chambers and dependent on correct interpretation of the figurine sequence. These revelations reframed the entire narrative. Charles was a tragic participant, guided unknowingly by a centuries-old system of observation, ritual, and moral instruction. 6. Psychological tensions resurface. Crow. This arrival and revelations reignited subtle tensions in the household. Staff and family became more cautious, aware that observation persisted. Lady Winthrop expressed both relief and unease. While Charles's crimes were over, the presence of an unseen moderator reminded her that human behavior remained under surveillance. Hastings noted that even I, normally composed, adjusted my observations and deductions to account for Crow's subtle influence. It was a reminder that in a system like the Black Cat legacy, psychology, observation, and influence extend far beyond the immediate acts of crime. 7. Subtle clues of further danger. Even as Crow reassured the household, subtle incidents indicated that not all threats had been neutralized. Faint scratches on floors and doors suggested someone had been moving cautiously, perhaps testing access to secret rooms. Minor alterations in the placement of figurines implied deliberate manipulation of the symbolic sequence. A small bundle of letters, partially burned, hinted at correspondence among distant relatives still watching the estate. Crow himself acknowledged these traces, emphasizing that the Black Cat system was designed to shape behavior over time, and that vigilance was required to avoid future tragedy. 8. Preparing for the final confrontation. Aware of the lingering threads of intrigue, I devised a plan: map all known secret passages and rooms, analyze and catalog all symbolic objects, monitor household activity for subtle behavioral cues, anticipate potential influence from distant relatives or unknown observers. Hastings, ever eager for action, asked, "Poirot, are we preparing for another attack?" "Not necessarily, Hastings," I replied. "But we are preparing to understand, anticipate, and intervene before a minor intrigue becomes a major danger. In a system like this, patience and reasoning are our greatest weapons." 9. Foreshadowing the next climax. Crow suggested one final observation: the Black Cat legend, artifacts, and rituals were not static. They evolved, adapting to the interpretations of each generation. This implied that future events could mirror or amplify the horrors Charles had unleashed. Certain objects in the secret rooms could trigger compulsion in psychologically susceptible individuals. Hidden correspondence among distant relatives suggested continued psychological experiments. Minor unresolved disputes regarding inheritance and legacy could catalyze obsession in future generations. The stage, Hastings realized with growing apprehension, was being set for another potential confrontation, one that would test both intellect and understanding of human psychology. 10. Poirot's reflections as night fell over Chiswick Manor. I reflected. Charles Winthrop acted lethally, but his actions were shaped by history, influence, and symbols. Nathaniel Crow is a guardian, but his presence illustrates the power of observation and subtle control. The Black Cat legacy is a system psychological, symbolic, and enduring, capable of shaping minds across generations. The story is far from over. While immediate danger is resolved, the underlying structure, influence, and potential for obsession remain, waiting for the next mind to engage with it. Hastings, exhausted yet attentive, whispered, "Poirot, the Black Cat. It's alive, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, Hastings. The Black Cat is not merely flesh and blood. It is legacy, legend, and human psychology combined. And it watches patiently, waiting for those who dare to interpret its symbols. Asterisk Part 16. The Secret Challenge and the Black Cats. Legacy tested. The frost lingered longer than usual over Chiswick Manor that winter, as though the house itself had decided to maintain a pole of vigilance. Even after Nathaniel Crow's arrival and revelations about the Guardian, the air within the estate was taut with anticipation. Every footstep, whisper, and creaking floorboard seemed amplified. The Black Cat, once reduced to a tale of legend and murder, had evolved into a test subtle, psychological, and deeply intellectual. I spent my mornings walking the corridors, observing gestures and cataloging symbols and hidden objects. Hastings, weary yet keen, followed my every step, eager for action but cautious after the prolonged tension of recent weeks. Together, we prepared for what was about to unfold, the next phase of the Black Cat legacy, now revealed as a system of challenge rather than mere threat. 1. A cryptic invitation. One morning, a note arrived, slipped under the library door. It bore no signature, only a small black cat emblem drawn with remarkable precision. The words were simple yet chilling. To understand the Black Cat, one must act where others only watch. The sequence awaits those patient and observant. Fail, and history repeats. Hastings read the note aloud, his voice tinged with unease. Poirot, it's like a puzzle. Oui, Hastings, I said, examining the emblem. And it is a test, a subtle psychological experiment. The Black Cat is no longer merely a narrative of murder. It is an intellectual and symbolic challenge, designed to reveal understanding, patience, and moral insight. Nathaniel Crow, when consulted, nodded gravely. This is the final test. The Black Cat's sequence is complete only when interpreted correctly. Those who attempt the challenge without understanding may invite danger, not necessarily from violence, but from misinterpretation and obsession. 2. Reconstructing the sequence. Crow guided us through the intricate sequence of Black Cat figurines, each carefully placed in the secret rooms. Observing closely, I noted that the sequence was multi-layered, combining spatial arrangement. The figurines' positions formed a map of the manor and hidden passages. Symbolic progression, subtle differences in posture, color, and markings indicated stages in the ritual. Historical references. Each figurine corresponded to an event, ancestor, or symbolic action recorded in the journals. Psychological triggers. The placement was designed to influence perception, induce reflection, and test reasoning. Hastings, inspecting the sequence, muttered, Poirot, it's almost like a game, but dangerous. Indeed, Hastings, I said. Observe. The Black Cat challenges not strength or bravery, but mind, morality, and observation. Every move is deliberate. One misstep, one misinterpretation, and the consequences, though subtle, are profound. 3. The first test. Observation. The initial challenge was deceptively simple. Identify the starting point in the sequence. At first glance, the figurines appeared scattered, but careful inspection revealed patterns. Small scratches on floors indicated movement across rooms. Faint discoloration suggested which objects were frequently handled. Historical notes in the journals hinted at events to follow, forming a narrative path. I guided Hastings in observing these cues. Hastings, the sequence begins where history, placement, and symbolism converge. One cannot rely on instinct alone. Observation is key. He nodded, taking careful notes. Poirot, this is unlike any case we've faced. Danger is invisible, but very real. 4. The second test. Interpretation. Having identified the starting figurine, the next step was interpretation. Each figurine carried subtle variations. One had a slightly raised paw, indicating forward movement. Another's eyes were painted differently, hinting at caution. Some figurines were deliberately placed upside down, signifying deviation from the expected path. Crow explained, the sequence is a story. Each figurine communicates intention, action, and consequence. Only one who understands the symbolism can proceed safely. I analyzed the objects carefully, considering both historical context and psychological influence. Hastings, though eager, made several errors, almost misreading the sequence. I corrected him gently. Hastings, intellect alone is insufficient. Observation must combine with understanding of human nature, legacy, and morality. That is the essence of the Black Cat. 5. Hidden passages and minor perils following the sequence led us into previously undiscovered passages, concealed behind false panels and ornate bookshelves. The corridors were narrow, twisting, and dimly lit, creating both physical and psychological tension. Some passages led to minor dead ends, testing patience and perseverance. Others contained objects designed to distract or mislead, false figurines, misleading inscriptions, or partially destroyed journals. Subtle noises, scratches, faint whispers, or footsteps tested composure and attentiveness. Hastings whispered, "Poirot. It's as if the house itself is testing us." Precisely, Hastings. The Black Cat is not a man, it is the system, the legacy, and the interplay of observation, symbols, and psychology. Every challenge is deliberate, every distraction purposeful. 6. Psychological challenges. The Black Cat tests were not only physical, but deeply psychological. At one point, we entered a small chamber with mirrors and reflective surfaces. Each mirror distorted perception subtly. Reflections suggested movement where none existed. Shadows appeared exaggerated or misplaced. Objects seemed closer or farther than reality dictated. The challenge was to trust observation over instinct, to discern fact from illusion. Hastings faltered initially, almost misinterpreting the correct sequence, but I guided him. Trust reason, not fear. Observe carefully, and the path reveals itself. Crow, observing silently, nodded approvingly. Few passed this stage unscathed. The Black Cat measures clarity, composure, and perception. Asterisk 7. Symbolic confrontation. At the heart of the challenge was a symbolic confrontation, in which the legacy of the Black Cat itself is represented. A central figurine, larger than the others, depicts a black cat with one paw raised and eyes fixed forward. Surrounding it are smaller figurines in positions reflecting previous generations, each symbolizing lessons, mistakes, and moral choices. The observer must interpret the intended moral and historical narrative, the essence of the Black Cat legacy. Before proceeding, I carefully analyzed the figurines, cross-referencing the journals and letters. Hastings, initially overwhelmed, observed the positioning but misread the moral implications. I corrected him. Hastings, the Black Cat teaches more than observation. It teaches discernment, responsibility, and understanding of legacy. Each figurine carries meaning beyond its position. Consider history, family, and morality together. 8. Nathaniel Crow's role in the challenge. Crow remained a subtle guide throughout the process. He did not intervene directly, but he provided cryptic hints when errors threatened delay or misinterpretation. He observed reactions to subtle psychological pressures. He evaluated our understanding of the Black Cat legacy, testing both intellect and moral reasoning. Hastings whispered, "Poirot. He seems both judge and teacher." "Indeed, Hastings," I replied. "The guardian ensures the system functions, but does not act as a crutch. The challenge is designed to develop understanding, not simply to complete a task." 9. Minor twists and hidden revelations. As we progressed, minor surprises tested adaptability. A previously undiscovered figurine, hidden in a false compartment, required careful identification before the sequence could continue. A cryptic note warned, "Deviation repeats history. Observe or be lost." Subtle environmental cues, faint drafts, cold spots. Minor shifts in lighting served as psychological tests. These twists ensured that the challenge was dynamic, interactive, and intellectually demanding, requiring both patience and insight. 10. Near-fatal misinterpretation. At one point, Hastings nearly misinterpreted a key figurine, suggesting a dead end in the sequence. This error was symbolic rather than physical in danger, representing the risk of misreading history and legacy. I intervened gently. "Hastings, observe not only the object but the narrative it conveys. What did the ancestors intend? What lesson is embedded? Consider morality, history, and symbolism together." Hastings' eyes widened. "Poirot, it's more than a puzzle, it's a test of character." "Exactly, Hastings. And therein lies the brilliance of the Black Cat legacy. Intellect alone is insufficient. One must combine observation, morality, and understanding of human psychology. 11. Progressing toward the final stage as the challenge neared its conclusion, figurines led us to the final hidden chamber. Historical references, minor artifacts, and letters provided the final narrative context. Psychological testing peaked. Shadows, reflections, and subtle sounds required complete composure to interpret correctly. Crow observed silently, eyes alert, as we approached the culmination of the sequence. The final figurine awaited a symbolic cat with eyes reflecting all previous generations. The literal and figurative center of the Black Cat legacy. 12. Poirot's deductive brilliance eye carefully analyzed the final figurine. The raised paw indicated continuation, not completion. The eyes, pointed with deliberate asymmetry, suggested interpretation through moral discernment, not mere observation. Positioning relative to other figurines revealed the hidden passage leading to the secret treasure and ultimate revelation of the Black Cat legacy. Hastings observed with awe. Poirot, you see what the rest cannot. Mais oui, Hastings, I said. Observation alone identifies a path. Deduction, moral insight, and understanding revealed the truth of the Black Cat. 13. Foreshadowing the climax as we prepared to open the secret passage, Crow nodded approvingly. He said quietly, "Few pass this stage fully. You have demonstrated intellect, composure, and understanding. But remember, the Black Cat is eternal. Its lessons endure beyond the house, beyond the individual. This is a test of mind, morality, and legacy." Hastings whispered nervously, "Poirot, I feel as if we were about to step into history itself." "Oui, Hastings," I replied. "The Black Cat tests not only action, but comprehension. What awaits may illuminate centuries of human nature, obsession, and legacy. Prepare carefully, for the final revelations are profound." Part 17. The ultimate revelation and confrontation with the Black Cat legacy. The evening fell over Chiswick Manor like a heavy velvet curtain, the last light of winter filtering through frost-covered windows. Shadows stretched across the corridors, seemingly alive with centuries of memory. Every whisper, every creaking floorboard, seemed amplified in the tense silence. The Black Cat had transformed from a tale of murder into a legacy and intricate system of symbolism, observation, and moral challenge. Hastings, ever vigilant but visibly tense, followed me through the final secret passage. Nathaniel Crow, the guardian, moved silently behind, observing our every gesture with an intensity that suggested both approval and subtle judgment. Lady Winthrop had retired for the evening, trusting us to confront the final stage of the Black Cat challenge. We stood before the final chamber, a heavy oak door, carved with centuries-old motifs, adorned with a single Black Cat emblem with eyes of gold leaf. It was the culmination of generations of design, observation, and ritual, a symbolic center of the Black Cat legacy. 1. The threshold of the Black Cat legacy. I paused before the door, studying the emblem closely. The Black Cat, poised as if ready to leap, symbolized vigilance, observation, and latent power. Surrounding it were subtle etchings, nearly invisible, tiny symbols representing previous guardians, moral lessons, and historical warnings. Hastings whispered nervously, "Poirot, it feels alive." I nodded. "Ah, Hastings, that is precisely its intention. The Black Cat is not merely an object. It is a living symbol of human psychology, moral responsibility, and legacy. Crossing this threshold requires composure, intellect, and discernment. One must respect history and observe carefully, or missteps may lead to misinterpretation rather than physical danger." Crow stepped forward, placing a hand on the door. "This is the final stage," he said quietly. "Interpretation, not force, will reveal the truth. The Black Cat watches, assesses, and guides. Only the observant and morally aware may proceed safely." 2. The Chamber of Legacy. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in soft, amber light. The chamber was circular, with walls lined with hundreds of Black Cat figurines in intricate patterns. The floor was marked with a complex mosaic, depicting the Winthrop lineage, historical events, and symbolic sequences. At the center stood a pedestal with a single black cat figurine, slightly larger than the rest, its eyes inlaid with tiny gemstones. This was the culmination of the black cat sequence, the symbolic heart of the legacy. Crow gestured subtly. Observe. Do not touch. Each figurine, each symbol, represents a lesson, a historical choice, and a moral consequence. Misinterpretation leads not to death, but to a failure of understanding, repetition of history, error, and obsession. 3. The final challenge. Observation and interpretation. I carefully examined the room, noting spatial patterns. The arrangement of figurines indicated pathways through moral and historical challenges. Symbolic variations, gestures, postures, and eye directions conveyed nuanced moral instructions. Historical echoes. Each figurine corresponded to documented family events, including disputes, reconciliations, and lessons learned. Psychological triggers. Objects and lighting were designed to induce hesitation, doubt, or distraction, testing composure and insight. Hastings, overwhelmed, asked quietly, "Poirot, how are we to know the correct path?" "Patience, Hastings," I replied. "Observe first, interpret second. The black cat is not solved by haste. It is understood through the integration of intellect, morality, and historical context." Crow's gaze, calm yet intense, reminded me that every step we took was being assessed. The Guardian was evaluating our understanding, judgment, and character. 4. Minor twists, psychological tests. As we progressed deeper into the chamber, certain figurines appeared out of chronological order, testing our perception of sequence. Reflections in polished surfaces created illusions of movement, designed to challenge observation and patience. Faint noises, almost imperceptible, suggested the presence of invisible observers, a reminder that legacy and vigilance extend beyond the room itself. Hastings faltered momentarily, almost misstepping in interpreting the path. I guided him gently. "Hastings, the challenge is not simply to move forward. One must understand the narrative, the moral lessons, and the historical context embedded in each symbol. Observe fully before acting." 5. Revealing the hidden truths at the central pedestal. I paused. The largest figurine, eyes glimmering, demanded careful interpretation. Crow watched silently, allowing insight to emerge without interference. I realized the black cat legacy was not a puzzle of death, but a moral and historical test. Its purpose was to ensure that generations understood the consequences of obsession and pride, to preserve historical knowledge without repeating tragedy, to teach discernment, patience, and moral responsibility. The journals, letters, and hidden artifacts all converged. Charles Winthrop's crimes had been a deviation, a failure to interpret the legacy correctly. The Guardian, Crow, had intervened subtly, preserving the system while preventing further catastrophe. 6. The Guardian speaks. Crow finally addressed us. "The black cat is a system, not a being. It watches not to harm, but to instruct." Charles failed because he sought to act without understanding. You, Poirot, and your companion have observed, interpreted, and demonstrated moral insight. That is the purpose of the legacy, to ensure understanding, to prevent repetition, to preserve balance. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, he's saying we passed the test?" I smiled faintly. "We, Hastings. Observation without understanding is insufficient. Action without insight is dangerous. We have met the criteria the legacy demands: patience, morality, and comprehension." 7. Symbolic resolution. The final figurine, placed on the pedestal, represented the culmination of generations of insight. I examined its posture and gaze. Raised paw signified vigilance and protection. Eyes aligned with surrounding figurines indicated moral clarity and understanding of history. The sequence as a whole symbolized the cycle of observation, consequence, and guidance. By interpreting the pedestal correctly, we unlocked the hidden compartment beneath it, revealing ancient family relics preserved for centuries, letters and journals confirming the intentions of previous guardians, a small codex detailing the philosophy of the Black Cat legacy, a combination of moral instruction, observation, and the dangers of obsession. Crow nodded approvingly. This is the essence of the Black Cat. Not murder, not obsession, but understanding moral insight preserved across generations. 8. Unexpected revelations. As we examined the artifacts, I discovered a previously unknown letter from Charles, written before his final acts. It revealed his awareness of manipulation, but also his misinterpretation of historical and symbolic cues. Crow revealed that other distant relatives had been monitoring, subtly influencing, but had refrained from action to preserve the system's integrity. A hidden map indicated additional chambers and artifacts, suggesting that the legacy extended even beyond Chiswick Manor, potentially influencing distant family estates. These revelations reframed the entire narrative. The murders, while tragic, were only one event in a centuries-long continuum of observation, symbolism, and moral instruction. 9. Moral lessons of the Black Cat. I reflected aloud. Obsession without insight leads to catastrophe. Observation must combine with moral discernment. History and legacy carry subtle influence over human behavior. Guardianship, subtle intervention, and guidance are more effective than direct force. Symbols, rituals, and traditions endure beyond individual lifetimes, shaping generations. Hastings murmured, "Poirot. It's more than a mystery, it's a lesson." "Exactement, Hastings," I replied. "The Black Cat is a narrative of human nature, legacy, and moral responsibility. Its influence is eternal, but its lessons can be learned if one observes carefully and acts wisely." 10. Foreshadowing future challenges. Even as the chamber was explored and the legacy understood, subtle hints remained. Some figurines suggested additional sequences, untested and unknown. Letters hinted at distant observers, ensuring continued vigilance. Crow implied that while immediate danger had passed, the system itself remains active, ready to challenge future generations. The Black Cat, in essence, had transformed from threat to teacher, from legend to living system. Its lessons, hidden in symbols and ritual, would persist, guiding minds capable of understanding them. 11. Closure and reflection. As we emerged from the chamber, Lady Winthrop greeted us, visibly relieved yet thoughtful. Hastings exhaled, exhausted but enlightened. Crow returned to his role as silent observer, guardian of the legacy, content that the challenge had been understood without catastrophe. I turned to Hastings. "Observe. Hastings' danger does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it is symbol, legacy, and psychological challenge. The Black Cat is now understood, but only because we approached with intellect, patience, and moral clarity." Hastings smiled faintly. "Poirot, I think I understand. The Black Cat isn't gone. It's waiting, watching, teaching." "We, Hastings?" "And that is precisely its enduring power." Part 18. Consolidation, consequences, and final twists. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy winter clouds over Chiswick Manor. Despite the light, the house seemed steeped in shadows residual from centuries of secrecy, obsession, and legend. The events of the past weeks, culminating in our confrontation with the Black Cat's ultimate legacy, had left the household both relieved and tense. The immediate threat of murder was gone, yet the psychological, historical, and symbolic consequences persisted. Hastings and I, still guided by Nathaniel Crow, moved through the manor with careful attention. Each room, corridor, and hidden passage now seemed alive with history, echoing the lessons and warnings of the Black Cat. The estate itself, having tested our intellect, patience, and moral judgment, seemed to observe us even now, silently awaiting the interpretation of its legacy. 1. Returning the artifacts. The first task was consolidation of the artifacts, letters and journals we had uncovered in the final chamber. Crow supervised the process, emphasizing preservation, order, and clarity. Each figurine was catalogued, photographed, and placed according to historical sequence. Letters, journals, and codices were secured in a dedicated chamber, accessible only to authorized observers or family guardians. Minor artifacts, previously scattered or misinterpreted, were repositioned according to the correct symbolic and historical arrangement. Hastings, dusting off a particularly intricate figurine, muttered, "Poirot." I never realized how much care went into all this. It's like the house itself is alive. "Exactement, Hastings," I replied. "The Black Cat is not merely a mystery. It is a living system of legacy, morality, and observation. Preservation is as important as comprehension. Mishandling any piece may disrupt the symbolic sequence and its lessons." 2. Psychological residue despite the physical resolution. The psychological impact of the Black Cat persisted. Lady Winthrop remained vigilant, often pausing in hallways, checking locks, and observing shadows. Servants displayed subtle hesitancy in movement, as though the house's hidden histories had shaped their behaviors. The younger Winthrops exhibited hyper-awareness, their curiosity tempered by an innate fear and respect for the symbolic system we had uncovered. Hastings observed, "Poirot. Even after all this, the house continues to influence them." "Precisely, Hastings," I replied. "History, symbols, and narrative leave a psychological imprint. Awareness of past events does not erase their influence. Observation and understanding are required to mitigate future misinterpretations or obsession." 3. Minor revelations during consolidation. Several hidden truths surfaced. A previously overlooked letter revealed that Charles had briefly questioned the morality of his actions, indicating a latent conscience. Though insufficient to prevent his crimes, it offered insight into his internal struggle. Crowe disclosed that distant relatives had been observing via correspondence and indirect messages, maintaining vigilance without interfering directly. A minor locked compartment in the library contained a collection of miniature figurines, representing hypothetical scenarios lessons, left for future generations to interpret correctly. These revelations reinforced the complexity of the Black Cat system. Direct action was less important than comprehension and moral insight. 4. Restoring household harmony, with artifacts secured and revelations acknowledged. Attention turned to the human consequences. Lady Winthrop initiated a series of discussions with staff and family, emphasizing transparency, observation, and the symbolic lessons of the Black Cat. Minor conflicts, previously amplified by fear and misunderstanding, were mediated carefully. Hastings noted a visible shift in household morale. The tension remained, but was now coupled with respect and awareness rather than mere fear. I reflected aloud. Observe, Hastings, the true resolution of the Black Cat lies not only in uncovering secrets, but in guiding human behavior. Preservation, understanding, and moral clarity are as vital as the prevention of murder. 5. Nathaniel Crowe's guidance. Crowe remained a subtle yet constant influence. Over several days, he provided instruction on interpreting the symbolic sequences, guidance on the proper handling of historical artifacts, insights into the long-term implications of the Black Cat legacy, particularly the role of observation, moral judgment, and restraint. He emphasized how the Black Cat was a living system designed to endure beyond immediate crises. Those who understood it were empowered. Those who ignored its lessons risked repeating past errors. 6. A hidden correspondence during final consolidation. A hidden letter was discovered in a false panel beneath the main library floor. Its contents were startling. The letter had been written by a previously unknown Winthrop relative, describing plans to subtly influence household behavior through symbolic acts and minor interventions. The correspondence indicated that the Black Cat system was designed to teach and moderate behavior, not merely punish. References to future observation suggested that even after our intervention, the legacy would continue to test and guide future generations. Hastings exclaimed, "Poirot, the Black Cat is never truly gone, is it?" "None, Hastings," I said. "It is eternal in principle. What changes is only our understanding of it and the wisdom we apply." 7. Unexpected twists, even in the aftermath. Subtle twists emerged. Some figurines were slightly misaligned, suggesting minor interference by distant observers. A previously locked compartment contained a journal hinting at an additional, undiscovered sequence meant to challenge future residents. Crowe reminded us that the Black Cat was a system of influence, Not just a narrative, its lessons, tests, and guidance extend across time, location, and generations. Hastings looked uneasy. Poirot, it seems the story is never fully over. Exactly, Hastings, I said. The legacy endures. Danger is now intellectual and moral, rather than physical, but it requires vigilance, observation, and understanding. 8. Reflection on human nature standing in the restored library. I reflected. Obsession, pride, and misinterpretation were catalysts for tragedy. Observation, patience, and moral clarity were the keys to resolution. Symbols, rituals, and legacies possess a force beyond immediate comprehension, shaping behavior subtly across generations. Guardians like Crow are essential for preserving balance and mitigating risk. Hastings, still processing, murmured. Poirot, I feel we've learned as much as the Black Cat intended. We, Hastings, I said. But remember, the lesson is iterative. Observation, understanding, and moral insight are never complete. They must be practiced continuously, lest history repeat itself. 9. Lady Winthrop's perspective. Lady Winthrop, now fully aware of the system and its lessons, expressed both relief and respect. She acknowledged the subtle influence of ancestors and distant relatives in shaping Charles's actions. She committed to educating the household about observation, moral judgment, and the symbolic legacy of the Black Cat. She recognized Crow's role as guardian and agreed that vigilance, combined with instruction, was essential to preventing future errors. Her calm resolve suggested a restoration of order, tempered by awareness of the ongoing influence of legacy and observation. 10. The house as a living system. As I walked the corridors one final time, I noted the manor's enduring presence. Hidden passages and symbolic arrangements remained intact, awaiting comprehension by future generations. Artifacts, journals, and figurines continued to communicate lessons silently. The psychological imprint of the Black Cat lingered, subtly shaping behavior and perception. Hastings, observing quietly, whispered, Poirot, the house itself seems alive. We, Hastings, I said. Not in flesh, but in principle. The Black Cat is the sum of observation, history, morality, and legacy, embedded in every wall, corridor, and artifact. Its influence is eternal, if subtle. 11. Closing twists. Even as the household settled, Crow hinted at minor sequences yet undiscovered, designed to test future residents of Chiswick Manor. Letters indicated that distant relatives continued to monitor, ensuring that the lessons of the Black Cat would not be forgotten. Subtle signs suggested that even resolved crises can leave residual tension, requiring continued vigilance and moral clarity. The story, Hastings realized, was both concluded and perpetual, a legacy rather than a finite narrative. 12. Poirot's final reflections. I reflected on the events and their significance. The Black Cat had moved from murder and obsession to symbolic challenge and moral instruction. Guardians like Crow preserved legacy and ensured ethical comprehension. Observation, patience, and moral insight were essential to interpreting history correctly. The human mind is influenced as much by symbols and legacy as by direct events. Hastings asked quietly, Poirot, do you think anyone will ever fully master the Black Cat? I smiled faintly. Hastings, mastery is impossible. Understanding and vigilance are the goal. The Black Cat endures not for conquest, but for lesson, observation, and moral growth. And that is its true power. Part 19. The final puzzle and ultimate resolution. The winter wind howled outside Chiswick Manor, rattling the windows as though the house itself were exhaling a long-held secret. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but purposeful. Weeks of discovery, observation, and interpretation had led Hastings and me to this moment, the final puzzle of the Black Cat legacy, the ultimate confrontation with the symbolic and historical forces that had shaped generations of Winthrops. Nathaniel Crow, the guardian, remained silently at my side, his presence both reassuring and enigmatic. Lady Winthrop had retired for the evening, trusting us to face the last trial, a puzzle so subtle, so intricately designed that it demanded intellect, patience, and moral insight in perfect combination. The final chamber had been prepared for us, Its door, an ancient oak reinforced with iron bands, bore the unmistakable emblem of the Black Cat, eyes inlaid with gold leaf. Beyond the threshold lay the culmination of centuries of legacy, observation, and symbolic instruction. 1. The threshold of the last trial. I paused before the door, observing the Black Cat emblem. Its posture ready to pounce, yet calm, symbolized both vigilance and wisdom. Crow gestured. The final puzzle is not merely to solve, but to understand. The Black Cat's essence will judge your comprehension, patience, and moral insight. Only one who integrates intellect with ethics may proceed without error. Hastings, visibly anxious, whispered, "Poirot, I feel as though the house itself is alive, testing us." I nodded. "Oui, Hastings. Observation, interpretation, and moral discernment. These are the keys." We step not merely into a room, but into the legacy itself. 2. The chamber of convergence. The door opened silently, revealing a circular chamber, walls lined with hundreds of figurines, letters and ancient manuscripts. At the center, a pedestal bearing a single Black Cat figurine, larger and more detailed than any we had previously encountered. Surrounding it were smaller figurines arranged in intricate sequences, each representing ancestors, past trials, and moral lessons. Crow instructed, "Observe fully. The sequence is multi-layered. It tests intellect, memory, moral judgment, and composure. One misstep may not be fatal, but it will distort understanding and repeat past errors." Hastings muttered, "Poirot, I can hardly take it all in. It's overwhelming." "Patience, Hastings. Understanding comes gradually. Let us begin carefully." 3. Observation and sequence analysis. I began examining the figurines systematically. Spatial arrangement. The positions formed a complex map, revealing paths through moral and historical challenges. Symbolic variation. Gestures, posture, and facial expression indicated subtle moral lessons. Historical correspondence. Each figurine represented a documented family event, including reconciliations, betrayals, and cautionary tales. Psychological tests. Subtle lighting, reflections, and spatial illusions challenged perception and composure. Hastings, eager yet overwhelmed, nearly misinterpreted the first sequence. I corrected him gently. "Hastings, observe, then interpret. Do not act hastily. Each element carries historical and moral significance." 4. Unveiling hidden clues while analyzing the sequence. I discovered previously unnoticed elements, tiny inscriptions on the floor, indicating ancestral guidance. Letters partially concealed beneath figurines, detailing moral instructions. Variations in eye placement, posture, and position suggesting the correct sequence for interpretation rather than mere placement. Crow observed silently, allowing comprehension to emerge without interference. His approval, subtle and understated, guided our understanding. 5. The moral dilemma at the chamber's center. The largest figurine presented a subtle moral dilemma. One paw raised suggested action. The other posture indicated restraint. The eyes seemed to challenge the observer. Act for personal gain or interpret with humility and ethical clarity. Hastings asked hesitantly, "Poirot, is it really a choice?" "Oui, Hastings. Observation alone is insufficient. One must weigh moral consequence, historical context, and ethical insight. The Black Cat tests not only intellect but character." I carefully positioned the figurine according to the moral lesson embedded in the sequence. Vigilance without pride. Action guided by understanding. Restraint tempered by insight. 6. The unexpected twist as the figurine moved into place. A hidden compartment opened within the pedestal. Inside, a journal revealing the true intent of previous guardians, emphasizing the preservation of moral insight over literal action. Letters indicating other distant relatives had subtly guided events, ensuring lessons rather than disasters. A small codex detailing future sequences, intended for subsequent generations to interpret and learn from. Crow said quietly, "Few reach this stage with full comprehension. You have demonstrated intellect, patience, and moral clarity. That is the essence of the Black Cat." Hastings whispered, "Poirot, it feels as if the house itself approves." Exactament, Hastings. Comprehension, not mere completion, is the goal. 7. Secondary revelation inside the pedestal. I also discovered a sealed envelope, addressed to me in elegant handwriting, centuries old. It contained a warning about the dangers of pride and obsession in interpreting legacy. Confirmation that Charles Winthrop's actions had been a deviation, not the intended outcome of the Black Cat system. Directions for preserving artifacts, journals, and figurines for future generations. The letter concluded, "The Black Cat observes. The wise learn. The reckless falter. Preserve understanding, and history's lessons endure." Hastings looked at me wide-eyed. "Poirot, it's the culmination of everything." We, Hastings. Observation, moral insight, and historical comprehension converge here. That is the true legacy of the Black Cat. *8. Hidden threats neutralized as we examined the chamber further. Crow revealed that distant observers had been monitoring, but posed no immediate threat. Minor misalignments in figurines suggested small, deliberate tests, ensuring vigilance was maintained. Faint traces of past tampering indicated previous attempts to misinterpret the sequence. Now corrected, the Black Cat, it seemed, remained a living system, but one that no longer posed immediate danger provided understanding and vigilance were maintained. 9. Symbolic resolution. The final arrangement of figurines and artifacts represented the culmination of generations of moral insight and ethical instruction, historical observation and documentation, vigilance, patience and restraint, recognition of human fallibility and legacy. Hastings, observing the completed sequence, whispered, "Poirot, it's beautiful and terrifying." Indeed, Hastings. Beauty lies in comprehension, terror in misinterpretation. The Black Cat tests both. 10. Crow's final words. Crow addressed us one final time. The Black Cat is not simply a mystery. It is a system, historical, symbolic, and psychological. It observes actions, tests moral insight, and preserves legacy. You have demonstrated understanding. Preserve this knowledge, and the lessons will endure. Fail, and history repeats itself. He turned and left silently, leaving Hastings and me alone with the chamber, the artifacts, and the weight of centuries of legacy. 11. Foreshadowing the final conclusion, even with the final puzzle solved. Subtle threads hinted at ongoing vigilance. Minor artifacts suggested future sequences for generations yet unborn. Letters hinted at distant relatives monitoring silently. The Black Cat remained, in principle, ever present, observing, and guiding. Hastings asked, "Poirot, it's over, isn't it?" "Partially, Hastings. The final confrontation of intellect and morality has concluded. But the system, the legacy, endures. Understanding is eternal. Action is finite." Part 20. The legacy concluded. The final dawn over Chiswick Manor broke slowly, filtered through frost-streaked windows and dusting the corridors with pale gold. The manor, centuries old and layered with memory, seemed unusually still, as if it too waited for the culmination of the Black Cat saga. After weeks of mystery, deception, observation, and moral testing, the final confrontation with the Black Cat's legacy had been completed. Yet the weight of centuries of symbolism, history, and subtle influence remained, waiting to be understood and preserved. Hastings and I moved quietly through the manor, accompanied only by the echoes of our own footsteps and the soft creak of the ancient floors. Nathaniel Crow, the guardian, had retreated to a discreet chamber, his silent vigilance a reminder that the legacy endured even beyond our immediate perception. The artifacts, letters, and figurines we had discovered now lay carefully catalogued, preserved with meticulous attention, awaiting generations yet to come. 1. Morning reflections. I paused in the main hallway, observing the interplay of light and shadow. Hastings, still visibly affected by the intensity of the previous days, asked quietly, "Poirot, can it ever truly be over?" I considered carefully. "Hastings, the Black Cat is not merely a narrative of crime. It is a living system of moral and intellectual challenge, observation, and historical continuity. While the immediate trials are complete, its influence endures. One can only comprehend, interpret, and preserve." Lady Winthrop, entering the hallway with calm dignity, nodded toward us. Her expression was a mixture of relief, respect, and lingering awareness. "You've done more than solve a mystery," she said. "You've understood something far greater than crime. You've preserved the family's legacy." Hastings, still incredulous, muttered, "But Poirot." All of this began with a single black cat legend. "Oui, Hastings," I replied. But legend, when entwined with history, human psychology, and morality, evolves into a system capable of shaping generations. The cat was never just a cat. It was a teacher, a challenge, a symbol of vigilance. 2. The final cataloging of artifacts scroll had prepared a final task: meticulous documentation of all figurines, letters, journals, and hidden artifacts. This process revealed layers of meaning previously unnoticed, subtle symbolic codes embedded in figurines' positions, gestures, and orientation, historical cross-references linking events across centuries, moral instructions subtly guiding behavior and reinforcing ethical awareness, psychological triggers embedded to test composure, observation, and reasoning. As Hastings and I worked, I explained, "Observe, Hastings. Each element has purpose. Even minor misalignments can alter interpretation, subtly affecting future understanding. Preservation is as vital as discovery." Hastings, brushing dust from a particularly ornate figurine, asked, "Poirot, why all this care?" "Because, Hastings, the black cat is eternal not through violence, but through intellect, moral guidance, and subtle influence. Misinterpretation may not kill, but it perpetuates ignorance and error." 3. Revisiting the moral lessons once cataloging was complete, we paused to reflect on the ethical and psychological lessons embedded within the legacy. Obsession without insight leads to disaster, as exemplified by Charles Winthrop. Observation alone is insufficient. Moral discernment and historical awareness are required. Legacy endures. Human actions echo across generations, for better or worse. Guardianship, like crows, is essential to moderate influence and prevent repetition of past errors. Symbols and rituals possess power beyond immediate perception, shaping behavior subtly yet profoundly. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, it's more than a mystery. It's a philosophy." "Exactement, Hastings. A philosophy, a system, and a guide. Observation, intellect, and morality converge here. That is the true power of the black cat." 4. Crow's final instruction. Crow reappeared, solemn and composed. His final instructions were both practical and philosophical. Artifacts must remain in their original sequence, accessible only to guardians and trusted observers. Journals and letters should be preserved, with annotations for comprehension and moral insight. Future generations must be educated in observation, reasoning, and ethical judgment. Psychological influence must be acknowledged, understood, and guided rather than suppressed or ignored. He concluded, "The black cat does not act. It teaches, observes, and preserves. Its influence endures only if understood, respected, and maintained. Those who fail to comprehend it may repeat the tragedies of the past." Hastings, overwhelmed, whispered, "Poirot, it's an entire system, not just a story." "Oui, Hastings," I said. "A system designed to endure across time, guiding minds capable of understanding its lessons." 5. Hidden twists uncovered. Even at this late stage, minor twists emerged, confirming that the legacy was never fully static. Certain letters revealed previous guardians' interventions, subtle yet decisive, shaping events without direct action. Minor figurines were found slightly out of alignment, suggesting tests left intentionally for future observers. A previously undiscovered codex contained hypothetical sequences, meant to ensure vigilance and continuous learning. The black cat, I realized, had transcended murder, legend, and observation, and had become a self-sustaining system of ethical and historical guidance. 6. The psychological aftermath. The manor, though peaceful, still bore the imprint of the black cat. Lady Winthrop displayed a newfound attentiveness, subtly observing staff and family members. Hastings noted that even casual gestures, conversations, and routines seemed shaped by historical awareness. I observed that the psychological tension, though reduced, now carried a subtle ethical dimension, guiding future behavior without force or fear. "Observe, Hastings," I said. "Influence does not always require direct action. Legacy, symbols, and historical awareness shape human thought, subtly but persistently." Asterisk 7. Preparing for the future with the immediate trials concluded, our attention turned to the long-term preservation of the Black Cat system. Archives and artifacts were secured in carefully designated chambers. Instructions for future guardians were documented, emphasizing moral and intellectual vigilance. Letters and codices were annotated to prevent misinterpretation by future generations. Hastings commented, "Poirot, it feels as though we're preparing for centuries, not weeks." Exactament, Hastings. That is the essence of the Black Cat. Its lessons, guidance, and influence are temporal and enduring, beyond any single event or generation. 8. Uniting the family. Lady Winthrop convened a family gathering, not to discuss fear or danger, but legacy, observation, and moral awareness. Key moments included sharing lessons from the Black Cat legacy without disclosing every secret, encouraging ethical reflection, observation, and awareness of historical influence, educating younger family members on vigilance, symbolic interpretation, and the consequences of obsession. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, they're learning without fear." "Oui, Hastings. That is the ultimate goal. Comprehension, not coercion. The Black Cat guides minds, not punishes them." 9. Resolving distant threats. Confirmed that distant relatives and observers, previously influencing events, were now content. Their vigilance would remain, but the immediate risk of misunderstanding or manipulation had been neutralized. The Black Cat's lessons had been successfully transmitted to the household, ensuring continuity without danger. Minor remaining sequences were symbolic tests, ensuring continued comprehension rather than threat. Hastings, examining a small figurine, murmured, "Poirot, even after all this, there's still a test?" "Oui, Hastings," I said. "The system never ceases. Observation, moral reasoning, and comprehension are lifelong disciplines." 10. Poirot's reflections on legacy alone in the final chamber. I reflected on the full scope of the Black Cat. The murders, puzzles, and sequences were mere expressions of a deeper system. Guardians like Crow ensured preservation and ethical guidance, subtle yet profound. Symbols, rituals, and observation created a system capable of shaping behavior across generations. Comprehension, not action, was the true measure of success. The Black Cat teaches vigilance, moral insight, and historical awareness, ensuring that human behavior aligns with reasoned ethics rather than blind obsession. Hastings joined me quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Poirot, I think I finally understand. It's more than a story. It's a guide." Exactament, Hastings. And that, in essence, is the true power of the Chiswick Black Cat. 11. Final symbolic gesture before leaving the chamber. I carefully repositioned the central figurine, paw raised, symbolizing vigilance and ethical guidance, eyes aligned with ancestral sequences. Representing moral continuity, placement reinforced the principle that observation, morality, and historical awareness converge to preserve legacy. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, it feels complete." "Oui, Hastings. Complete, yet eternal. The Black Cat endures, guiding generations through observation, understanding, and moral clarity. And that is its true purpose." 12. Closing the circle, the manor, now bathed in the soft glow of winter sunlight, seemed to exhale centuries of secrets. The immediate danger had passed, the final puzzle solved, and the legacy preserved. Yet subtle signs reminded us, vigilance and observation remain essential. Moral and historical comprehension must be continually practiced. The Black Cat's influence, though subtle, endures indefinitely. Hastings smiled faintly. "Poirot, it's a story without an ending, isn't it?" "Exactament, Hastings. Not an ending, but a continuum of understanding, observation, and moral vigilance. That is the essence of the Chiswick Black Cat."